Victor Hale had crushed corporations without blinking, yet the instant he spotted Cassandra through that café window, 3 small figures orbiting her like moons, his legs forgot how to function. If you're new here, subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss a story. Drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these narratives travel. Victor Hale hadn't stepped inside a coffee shop in 6 years, not because Manhattan lacked options. He possessed a live-in barista at his triplex on the 71st floor of Hale Tower, a private espresso suite adjoining his boardroom where he conducted negotiations with foreign ministers and hedge fund titans, and standing accounts at every elite establishment in the city, accounts his chief of staff maintained like religious observances even when Victor never materialized. He avoided coffee shops because they stored memory, the way old photographs hold the scent of vanished summers, and Victor Hale could not afford memory. Memory was the single adversary his $4.7 billion conglomerate possessed no weapon against. But on this particular Thursday in March, something fractured. He'd been presiding over a strategy session on the 59th floor, encircled by 17 executives who each collected 7-figure compensation packages to echo his opinions, analyzing the hostile takeover of a European shipping empire that would contribute another $500 million to his holdings. Somewhere during the COO's projections, Victor simply ceased participating. Not drifting, ceased. His mind had exited the building while his body remained. He'd stared at his own reflection in the polished table and thought, I've occupied this chair 9,000 times. Then he'd risen and without explanation, without gathering his tablet or phone, without even buttoning his jacket, he'd departed. His chief of staff, Raymond, intercepted him at the elevator clutching a schedule and radiating controlled terror. Mr. Hale, the Zurich delegation is still presenting. You have the Singapore conference at 3, the foundation benefit at 7, and your mother has called twice regarding the board appointment. Clear the day, Victor said, the elevator sealed. He emerged into March air sharp as broken glass and kept walking. No compass, no objective. His protection detail scrambled to trail him at a discreet remove, the way they invariably did during what Raymond privately termed his interludes, those infrequent, disconcerting intervals when the machinery of Victor Hale simply declined to operate. He traversed 11 blocks south and 4 east before arresting mid-stride. The aroma stopped him. Cinnamon and fresh yeast and something darker underneath, molasses perhaps or brown sugar caramelizing, drifting through a propped-open doorway onto the pavement. Before cognition could intercept impulse, Victor stood before a café he hadn't visited in 6 years and had devoted 6 years to not contemplating, the Copper Kettle. The signage had been redesigned. The exterior tables were new, wrought iron where there used to be weathered teak, but the door with its small brass bell was identical. The window seats were identical. And the manner in which the afternoon illumination struck the frosted glass was exactly, surgically, ruinously identical to how it had appeared when a 23-year-old Cassandra Voss had seized his elbow on a drizzly Thursday and declared, "In here, believe me, the scones will rearrange your existence." Victor remained on the pavement and could not advance. He'd loved her more profoundly than he'd ever confessed, even within the sealed courtroom of his own skull. He'd loved her with the careless, voracious manner people love things they assume will perpetually remain, the way you love gravity, without appreciation, without consciousness, until the moment it releases you. He'd married her at 28, this luminous, tenacious, irreverent woman who was pulling double shifts at a bakery to finance her architecture degree, and still extracted joy from things as modest as a properly laminated quasar. He'd constructed his dominion throughout their marriage, labouring hours incompatible with human intimacy, reassuring himself there would be occasion later, abundant occasion, that she understood, that she possessed patience, that she would forever remain. She had not forever remained. She had vanished. The dissolution papers had arrived through his attorney, and the basis had been irreparable breakdown, and Victor had absorbed those 2 words in the rear of his town car en route to a merger signing, and had not wept because Victor Hale did not weep, had not wept since he was 7 years old. But some mechanism inside him had soundlessly and entirely seized. He had not revisited the Copper Kettle, until today. He shouldered the door open. The interior enveloped him, warm, fragrant with espresso and toasted sugar. The midday crowd populated every table, the comfortable disorder of a neighborhood establishment. Voices layering, flatware chiming, somewhere a toddler's shriek of delight. Victor stood at the threshold and experienced something he hadn't felt in years, something adjacent to tranquility. Then the floor dissolved beneath his feet. She occupied the far corner near the bay window, the table that Victor remembered as perpetually reserved, the most desirable position in the entire café. Her back was partially angled away from him, and she wore a sage cardigan, and her hair, her hair remained that identical shade of chestnut, still twisted up the way she'd always arranged it while laboring. And she was inclined forward, murmuring something to whoever occupied the booth. Victor's brain identified Cassandra before his body could respond. His feet arrested, his ribcage contracted, his pulse detonated in his ears. Then Cassandra straightened, pivoted fractionally to reach for a dish, and Victor perceived the stroller. Not merely a stroller, a triple stroller, one of those elongated engineering marvels of aluminum and canvas, manufactured for the particular, exhausting mission of transporting 3 small humans simultaneously. It was positioned at the booth's end, and it was occupied. 3 children. He could distinguish 2 faces distinctly from where he stood, framed beneath the stroller canopies, round, attentive, dark-eyed countenances belonging to children who appeared past the infant phase but not yet school-aged. And within the booth itself, a 3rd child stood on the cushion, gripping the backrest and proclaiming something significant to Cassandra in a tone that carried across the ambient noise. Victor could not discern the words. He could discern nothing whatsoever because the child standing in the booth, the one with the sable hair and the exact angle of the chin, and the stance with both feet planted as though preparing to defend a thesis, that child gazed at Victor across the expanse of the café with deep brown eyes that Victor had confronted in a mirror every dawn for 38 years. The architecture of Victor Hale's chest collapsed inward. He did not move, could not move. He was 38 years old and commanded $4.7 billion. He'd negotiated with sovereign governments, dissolved corporate dynasties, weathered an attempted boardroom coup that would have shattered most individuals twice his seniority. And he stood in the entrance of a modest café in Lower Manhattan, wholly incapable of advancing a solitary step. Cassandra rotated, their gazes collided. The pigmentation drained from her features so absolutely and so instantaneously that Victor took an automatic stride forward, some primal reflex activating. She was going to collapse, she required. She did not collapse. Cassandra Voss had never collapsed in her existence. Instead, she executed something that impacted Victor more forcefully than any reaction he could have envisioned. She seized the triple stroller's handle with both hands and retreated 1 pace, situating herself between it and him, like a creature interposing itself between a predator and its offspring. That solitary motion resolved the query Victor hadn't recognized he was posing. He traversed the café. He remained unaware of the surrounding conversations diminishing, of fellow patrons glancing upward, of the hostess advancing to intercept him, and then reconsidering after registering his expression. He registered solely Cassandra and the stroller and the child in the booth who had ceased speaking, and was now observing him with those inconceivable, familiar eyes. Cassandra, his voice surfaced rougher than intended, deeper. He halted 2 feet from her, near enough to perceive that her knuckles had whitened on the stroller grip, and her jaw had fixed in that manner he recognized, the manner she adopted when she'd formulated a resolution and was steeled to uphold it against the entire world's pressure. Victor! Her tone was calibrated, cautious, the voice of someone who had rehearsed this encounter. He grasped. Not recently. She'd rehearsed it years past, had braced for it, and then had hoped it would never materialize. He examined the stroller. 2 children stared back with rounded, inquisitive gazes. One possessed Victor's precise chin, the other had Cassandra's nose and Victor's brow line, a convergence of genetics so apparent it bordered on architectural. He studied the child in the booth, who wore the entirety of Victor's face in miniature, currently exhibiting an expression that was purely Cassandra, watchful, perceptive, more discerning than any child of that age should reasonably be. How old? Victor demanded, not an inquiry, a seismic event. Cassandra's chin elevated. Victor, how old are they? This is neither the time nor location. Cassandra, he pronounced her name like a door sealing shut. How old are my children? The word "my" fell between them like a stone through ice. She flinched, then her jaw reset, that terrible, steadfast determination. 4, she uttered quietly. They'll turn 5 in April. April, Victor computed the arithmetic involuntarily. Computed it the manner his mind computed everything, automatically, instantaneously, mercilessly. April, 5 years old, conceived, he arrested. He understood precisely when they'd been conceived. He comprehended the month because it had constituted the final good month, the concluding month before the protracted decline into distance and silence, and then the divorce filing. She'd been carrying his offspring when she departed him. She'd been pregnant with his children when she inscribed her signature on those documents and exited his existence. You were pregnant. He could perceive his own voice from a peculiar distance, the way you perceive sounds when blood roars too loudly in your ears. When you departed, you were already pregnant. Cassandra uttered nothing. You were pregnant with my children, and you withheld it from me. Victor, please moderate your volume. You withheld it. His voice wasn't elevated. That constituted the chilling aspect. It was exceptionally subdued, which somehow proved worse for both parties. You departed and you took. He arrested, recalibrated, studied the children who were all three observing him with that disconcerting unified focus. What are their designations? Cassandra's respiration caught. He witnessed it. Their names, Cassandra. Oliver, she articulated after an interval. She indicated the booth, toward the dark-eyed boy who was scrutinizing Victor with the concentrated skepticism of a veteran interrogator. Jasper, one of the stroller occupants who possessed Victor's jaw and who was presently evaluating him with the serene forbearance of an auditor. And Eloin, the third child who selected that exact instant to direct a grin at Victor, the complete, uncalculating transparency of a human who had not yet acquired the skill of distrust. That grin was so thoroughly Cassandra that it impacted Victor like a physical blow. Oliver, Jasper, Eloin. His offspring possessed names. His offspring possessed names he had not bestowed, had not selected, had not murmured above bassinets or debated with the inconceivable tenderness of new parents. His offspring possessed names and 4 years of natal days and private jokes he didn't comprehend and preferred meals he hadn't prepared and inaugural words he had not witnessed. I require you to accompany me outside, Victor stated. I'm not proceeding anywhere with you. Cassandra. I'm in the middle of lunch with my children, Victor, and I will not conduct this discourse before them. Her voice remained soft, remained controlled, and he despised how composed she was, despised and respected it concurrently, the manner he invariably had. If you wish to converse, and we will need to converse, I recognize that, I've always recognized this day would arrive, then you will seat yourself, you will request something, and you will be a composed and typical adult before 3-4-year-olds who do not comprehend who you are, or you will exit. Those constitute your alternatives. Victor stared at her. His legal team could place him in family court before week's end. His resources were unfathomable. He could entomb her in legal proceedings that would consume years and exhaust every asset she possessed. He could extract these children, his children, from this café to his triplex with a solitary phone call, could demonstrate fitness and financial capability that no judiciary in the nation could dispute. He comprehended all of this. And he also comprehended, with a clarity that startled him, that he was not going to execute any of it. Not before them. Not before those three countenances that were observing him with varying gradations of suspicion and inquisitiveness, and one devastating, open-spirited smile. He withdrew the chair opposite Cassandra's side of the booth. He seated himself. There was silence. Then Oliver, from the booth cushion, pronounced with the directness of a child who has been cultivated to pose inquiries straightforwardly, "Who are you?" Victor regarded his son. "I'm an old acquaintance of your mother's." Oliver contemplated this with the solemnity of a constitutional scholar. "You made her upset." Oliver, Cassandra initiated. "He did," Oliver stated unapologetically. Her countenance performed the maneuver. "What maneuver?" Victor inquired before he could suppress it. "The maneuver where she's attempting to conceal something," Oliver articulated. "She executes it when she's sorrowful or when she doesn't desire us to worry. Her mouth does this." He demonstrated a precise and genuinely remarkable impression of Cassandra's controlled expression. Cassandra sealed her eyes momentarily. Victor examined his son. This boy, who was 4 years old and could interpret his mother's features with greater accuracy than most adults achieved in a lifetime, who identified emotional concealment with the composed certainty of someone who had made it his vocation to pay attention. "I apologize," Victor stated, "for distressing her." Oliver regarded him for another protracted interval. Then, evidently having concluded his evaluation, he selected a fragment of scone from the basket on the table, incised a corner with tremendous solemnity, and redirected his focus to his meal. Jasper in the stroller had not withdrawn his scrutiny from Victor. He articulated nothing, but his gaze constituted the variety that rendered adults self-aware, the variety that perceived things. Eloin announced cheerfully, "Do you appreciate scones?" "I do," Victor responded. "They're exceptional here. Mother states they're enchanted scones." She extended him a portion with the magnanimity of someone for whom sharing is simply the evident and appropriate action. Victor accepted the scone. His hand was not entirely stable. He glanced at Cassandra across the table. She was observing him with an expression he could not decipher, or rather, could decipher too thoroughly. She was observing him with the countenance of someone who was terrified and fortified, and also, somewhere exceedingly deep and exceedingly carefully concealed, not wholly devoid of hope. He recognized that countenance. He'd loved that countenance for 7 years. He would have identified it in absolute darkness beneath the ocean at the termination of the world. "Cassandra," he said softly. "Not here," she replied, equally soft. "Agreed," he stated. And somehow, impossibly, they requested lunch. It constituted the most surreal hour of Victor Hale's adult existence. He sat opposite his former wife and adjacent to 3 children who were his, and who did not comprehend it, and he requested the turkey and brie sandwich he'd ordered every occasion they'd frequented this establishment, and he consumed it. And Cassandra fed Eloin and Jasper from the stroller tray, and navigated Oliver's ongoing position that he should be permitted dual desserts on the basis that he'd consumed all his vegetables. That constituted the arrangement, Oliver articulated reasonably. "You declared if I consumed all my vegetables I could have dessert." "One dessert," Cassandra stated. "You didn't specify one." "I implied one." "You implied I could have dessert. You did not designate a quantity." Victor compressed his knuckles against his mouth to mask an involuntary response that was almost, a smile. Cassandra intercepted his gaze across the table, and something flickered in her expression, something agonizing and complex, the recollection of shared amusement that neither of them possessed the right to experience presently. "He inherits that from you," she murmured, "the argumentation." "My negotiation competencies are valued at 4.7 billion, Victor responded, equally subdued. "To him, they're valued at a supplementary cookie. So I'd assert he's surpassing you on efficiency." It constituted the most human exchange they'd achieved, and it endured approximately 5 seconds before Cassandra averted her gaze, and the barrier re-established itself, and Victor recollected that they were not 2 individuals sharing a minor jest about their son over lunch. They were 2 individuals with 6 years of silence and secrets, and an accounting that had scarcely commenced between them. Following lunch, Cassandra compensated the bill. Victor extended his hand toward the check, and she positioned her palm over it with a flat expression he recognized as non-negotiable. Then commenced the intricate procedure of extracting 3 children and a triple stroller from a café booth. Victor observed, and then without deliberation rose and moved to stabilize the stroller while she unfolded it. Their hands were adjacent on the grip for 1 instant. Neither of them articulated anything. Exterior on the pavement, the March atmosphere had acquired a serrated edge. Eloin demanded to be elevated, and Cassandra hoisted her to her hip with the automatic fluidity of someone who has executed this maneuver 10,000 times. Oliver and Jasper flanked the stroller with the patient preparedness of children who comprehended the protocol of departures. Victor stood on the pavement and regarded Cassandra, and could not locate the commencement of what required articulation. "Where do you dwell?" he inquired. "Victor, I'm not inquiring so I can materialize. I'm inquiring because," he arrested. "Because what? Because he required confirmation they were secure. Because he required the capacity to envision the location where his children slumbered and awakened and matured in his absence. Because I need to comprehend how much I've forfeited." Cassandra examined him for a protracted moment. Eloin was patting Cassandra's features with the absent-minded affection of a child comfortable in a guardian's embrace. Oliver was monitoring the exchange with his disconcerting focus. Jasper was observing Victor with something that resided between suspicion and openness, something meticulously neutral. 14 blocks north, Cassandra articulated finally. We've occupied that apartment since they were 11 months old. 14 blocks. For 4 years, Victor had been situated 14 blocks from his children. He'd strode past this café countless instances in the years following the divorce, invariably on the opposite side of the thoroughfare, never pausing, never glancing. He'd likely been 14 blocks from his children, 100 instances without awareness. I'm going to contact my attorney, he stated. Cassandra's form went rigid. Not, he elevated his palm, not for what you're conjecturing. I require a paternity verification. I require legal documentation, not because I harbour doubt. He studied Oliver, studied Jasper, studied the particular mathematical certainty of their features. I possess no doubt. I require the legal record because whatever follows must be constructed upon something authentic. Cassandra stared at him. And what follows, Victor? What do you envision follows? I don't comprehend yet, he articulated honestly. But I comprehend it entails being present in their lives. It must, you cannot simply decree that, Victor. Her voice was exceptionally controlled, exceptionally steady, and he perceived what lay beneath the control. Not fury, not menace, something more perilous than either. Certainty. I have forfeited 4 years. I will not forfeit 1 additional day than I am legally obligated to. I wish to execute this correctly. I wish to execute this in a fashion that doesn't wound them, but I will execute it. Cassandra scrutinized him for a protracted interval. Saturday, she articulated finally. You may visit Saturday to encounter them appropriately. 1 hour my apartment, my regulations. Accepted. And Victor, she transferred a low into her opposing hip and met his gaze with something exceptionally direct. Before Saturday, you need to be exceptionally certain about the category of individual you're going to be for them, because they don't require a billionaire. They don't require a penthouse or a private institution or any of that. They require a father who manifests. And the instant you cease manifesting, the instant you determine your dominion matters more than a Saturday morning at their playground, I will oppose you with everything I possess. I have been opposing for these children for 4 years, and I will not desist. Victor contemplated the board session he'd vacated 90 minutes prior. About the 14 subsequent meetings Raymond had frantically messaged him regarding, about the Zurich delegation and the foundation benefit, and the relentless, inescapable apparatus of his professional existence. He contemplated a small boy who had interpreted his mother's concealed sorrow with the precision of a diagnostician and articulated it without hesitation. He contemplated a girl who had extended a stranger a fragment of scone with the complete, unself-conscious generosity of someone cultivated to believe sharing was simply what you executed. He contemplated a second boy who had observed him across a café table for an entire hour with careful, patient, ancient-seeming eyes, withholding judgment, accumulating data, in no particular haste about either. He contemplated 14 blocks, 4 years, April birthdays he had not known to commemorate. I'll be present Saturday, he declared. Cassandra nodded once. Then she rotated the stroller northward and commenced walking, and his children walked adjacent to her. Oliver with his hands burrowed in his pockets and his cranium slightly inclined in contemplation. Jasper with his careful eyes directed forward. Eloine craning her neck backward over Cassandra's shoulder to regard Victor with one additional open, unguarded smile. He remained on the pavement and observed them until they rounded the corner and vanished. Then he extracted his phone and dialed Raymond. Clear Saturday, he commanded. Mr. Hale, the Zurich delegation. Clear Saturday, Raymond, and connect me with Dr. Patricia Okonkwo at Crestwood Medical. I need to consult a family law specialist before end of business, not Harrison, my corporate counsel, someone who specializes in paternity and custodial arrangements. Silence occupied the line's opposite terminus. Is everything satisfactory, sir? Victor gazed at the corner where Cassandra had disappeared. At the ordinary Thursday pavement, where the complete geography of his existence had just rotated 4 degrees on its axis. No, he articulated, but it will be. He terminated the call. He remained there for another interval on the pavement outside the copper kettle, and for the initial time in 6 years, Victor Hale experienced something that was not emptiness. It was not joy. It was not resolution. It was something more unrefined and more complex than either, the particular anguish of an individual who has finally comprehended the magnitude of what he forfeited. and is only just commencing to comprehend the magnitude of what might still, barely, impossibly be reclaimed. He commenced walking, not toward the tower, not toward any meeting or obligation or appointment. He walked 14 blocks north, and he located the street, located the edifice, an unremarkable brick construction with window boxes and an intercom panel adjacent to the entrance, and he stood on the opposite pavement and studied it for a protracted duration. Somewhere within those levels, 3 children with his eyes were finishing lunch and executing whatever 4-year-olds executed in the afternoon. Existing a life he had not comprehended existed, becoming individuals he had not possessed the privilege of witnessing become. His phone accumulated 63 unread communications. He did not examine it. He stood on the pavement, and he observed the edifice the manner he had never observed anything in his existence. Not a market projection, not a contract, not the countenance of an adversary across a negotiation table. He observed it the manner you observe something you are only commencing to comprehend the value of, something you possessed and forfeited without comprehending you possessed it. Something that will cost you more to reclaim than anything you have ever purchased, and is worth every cent. Saturday he contemplated. He rotated and walked back downtown. He possessed calls to execute, legal preparations to commence, a paternity verification to request, not because he questioned the children's origins for a solitary second, but because he required the documented, legal, incontrovertible record that would permit him to contend in any court, in any jurisdiction, for the right to be present in the existences of Oliver and Jasper and Eloin Hale, because they would be Hales. He had not articulated that yet. He would not articulate it to Cassandra on a pavement on the initial day, but the determination was already forged, quietly and entirely, the manner Victor Hale forged the determinations that mattered. Not loudly, not with spectacle, but with the absolute and unshakable certainty of an individual who has identified what he desires and has reconciled with the cost of obtaining it. He was going to be their father. He was going to determine, however prolonged it required and however much it cost him, what that signified and how to execute it. And whatever had preserved them from him, whatever sequence of occurrences and selections and failures had produced 6 years of absence, he was going to comprehend every dimension of it, every cause, every determination, every instant where the trajectory could have diverged and didn't. He owed his children that measure. He owed Cassandra that measure. And somewhere beneath the fury and the grief and the shock of the afternoon, beneath all of it, resided a query he had not yet permitted himself to pose directly, because the response, whatever it constituted, was going to transform everything. Why had Cassandra departed? Not the official response, not the irreparable breakdown of the legal documentation. He comprehended Cassandra. He had comprehended Cassandra in the manner you comprehend someone when you have shared a dwelling and an aspiration and a daily existence with them for years. And Cassandra Voss, whatever her deficiencies, was not the category of woman who walked away. She was the category of woman who stood and battled for things, who clutched on past the juncture where other individuals would have released, who would have relocated mountains with her bare palms before she would have abandoned something she believed in. She had believed in them, he was certain of that. He had been negligent with her belief, had accepted it as assumed, the manner you accept as assumed anything that appears permanent, but he had never questioned the belief itself, so why had she departed? Victor Hale walked back toward his tower through the March afternoon, with his phone still unanswered and his calendar in wreckage, and something cold and exacting commencing to coalesce at the posterior of his consciousness. Not yet a conclusion, not yet an accusation, but the silhouette of a query that would not permit him respite until he had pursued it all the course to its response. Whatever that response proved to be, he possessed the sensation it was going to be catastrophic. He possessed the sensation it was going to transform not merely his future, but his comprehension of the preceding 6 years, every solitary day of them, every presumption he had existed by, every fragment of the narrative he had narrated to himself about why his marriage had terminated, and who bore responsibility and what constituted truth. He possessed the sensation that the ground was not finished shifting. But Saturday was approaching, and for the initial time in 6 years, Victor Hale possessed somewhere to be that signified more than anything else on earth. Saturday arrived both more rapidly than Victor anticipated, and more sluggishly than he could endure. In the 48 hours between the café and the instant he stood external to Cassandra's edifice with his palm elevated to press apartment 3B, Victor had not slumbered more than 3 hours cumulatively. He had occupied his triplex in darkness, in the particular stillness of an individual whose consciousness refuses to cease executing the identical computations repeatedly, arriving at the identical inconceivable figure each iteration. 4 years, 48 months, approximately 1,460 days of natal celebrations and fevers and inaugural words and abraded knees and bedtime narratives, and all the 10,000 ordinary instants that constitute a childhood. 1,460 days that belonged to him and had been experienced without him. He pressed the intercom. There was a protracted interval, sufficiently protracted that he wondered whether she had reconsidered, whether she stood on the opposing side of the entrance deliberating whether to permit him ingress, whether the hazard remained excessive. Then the speaker crackled. "Third level landing," Cassandra's voice articulated. "Apartment 3B, I'll encounter you there." She was anticipating at the stairwell summit when he ascended. She had the apartment door drawn, nearly sealed behind her, and he comprehended immediately. She desired discourse with him alone initially, desired to establish the parameters before she permitted him across the threshold into the space where her children dwelled. Their children. "Before you enter," she articulated, "we need to concur on certain items." "Agreed." "They don't comprehend who you are. I've informed them you're an acquaintance from a considerable duration past who's going to visit. Nothing additional. You don't inform them anything about being their father until we've conversed, until we possess a strategy, until I am satisfied that you are earnest and stable enough to manage that discourse without damaging them. Are we concurred?" "Affirmative." She examined him. "You engaged a family attorney." "Affirmative. Patricia Okonkwo contacted you." "She telephoned yesterday. She stated you're filing for paternity acknowledgement and wished to discuss a custodial arrangement. I instructed her to establish initial contact before filing anything. I didn't wish you blindsided." Cassandra was silent for an interval. He could perceive her recalibrating, adjusting for the actuality that he had managed it with greater consideration than she had anticipated. "The paternity verification," she articulated. "I've scheduled it for Tuesday. Non-invasive private laboratory results within 72 hours. My attorney will distribute them to yours concurrently." He hesitated. "I comprehend their mind, Cassandra. The verification is for the legal record, not for me." Something traversed her features, something she controlled instantly. 1 hour, she articulated. "If it proceeds adequately, possibly marginally longer. If any of them become distressed or uncomfortable, you depart instantly. No argument." "Understood." She opened the entrance. The apartment was compact and heated and absolutely vibrant. That constituted the initial aspect that impacted him, the vibrancy of it, the density of presence that 3 small children generate within a space. The playthings on the flooring and the illustrations on the refrigerator, and the aroma of something baking, and the audio of a device in another chamber playing something animated at a volume calibrated to the auditory preferences of the under 5 demographic. Victor stood in the entrance and absorbed all of it, and experienced something in his chest, execute something for which he possessed no vocabulary. Oliver materialized initially, emerging from the corridor with the confident stride of a child who possesses the space he traverses. He arrested when he perceived Victor, and that focused, evaluating expression returned instantly. The expression Victor had been contemplating for 2 days. "You returned," Oliver stated. "I declared I would." Oliver appeared to contemplate whether this was sufficient. "Mother stated you're her acquaintance." "That's accurate." "From a considerable duration past." "Affirmative." "How considerable?" Victor glanced at Cassandra, who offered him nothing. "Before you were born," Victor articulated. Oliver processed this. "That is considerable," he concurred earnestly. Then he rotated and proceeded back down the corridor, apparently satisfied, and bellowed, "Jasper, Eloin, mother's acquaintance is present." The subsequent 10 minutes constituted chaos, the particular joyful variety that is unique to households containing small children. Eloin came sprinting and instantly desired to exhibit Victor an illustration she had produced of their feline, a creature designated Muffin, who became perceptible an instant later, an enormous grey tabby who strode directly onto Victor's footwear and seated himself with the absolute confidence of an animal who has never once been refused anything. Jasper arrived last. As Victor was already learning, he invariably arrived last, taking his duration, observing from the corridor before he committed to entering the chamber. Victor occupied the sofa. Muffin remained on his footwear. Eloin exhibited him 16 illustrations sequentially, narrating each with the comprehensiveness of a gallery curator. Oliver challenged him to identify the current world record for the tallest block tower, a query Victor could not answer and confessed freely, which appeared to amplify rather than diminish Oliver's estimation of him. And Jasper occupied the armchair across the chamber and observed, silent, patient. And Victor experienced that observation the manner you experience a lens, not uncomfortable precisely, but cognizant. Cassandra prepared coffee. She traversed in and out of the chamber, and each occasion she passed, Victor intercepted her gaze for a half-second, evaluating him, measuring, seeking the indicators she feared she would discover. The indicators that this was performance, that the warmth he was extending to her children was calculated, that beneath the attentiveness there existed the cold framework of an individual who desired to prevail at something. He comprehended why she was observing. He did not resent it. If their positions were inverted, if he had expended 4 years safeguarding 3 children alone, and the other parent had abruptly resurfaced with the resources of a minor nation at his disposal, he would have been executing the identical action, and executing it more intensely. After 45 minutes, Jasper spoke. He had not articulated a solitary word since Victor arrived, had simply observed from the armchair with Muffin's secondary allegiance. The cat had migrated to Jasper's lap somewhere around the 14th illustration, and Victor had not pressured him, had directed nothing at him directly, had simply permitted him to exist on his own terms in his own duration. "Do you comprehend how to repair items?" Jasper inquired. Victor regarded him directly. "What category of items?" Oliver's remote-controlled vehicle. The wheel detached and Mother attempted to repair it, but the component is exceptionally small, and she stated her fingers are excessively large. He articulated this without any implication that Cassandra had failed, simply a neutral reportage of actuality. "I can attempt," Victor stated. Jasper rose from the armchair, vanished down the corridor, and returned with a small azure remote-controlled vehicle and a wheel that had separated from its axle. He extended both to Victor, and then occupied the sofa adjacent to him, proximate but not contacting, and observed. Victor examined the vehicle. He had never repaired a plaything in his existence. He had, in his lifetime, supervised the restructuring of a $400 million infrastructure initiative and mediated the merger of 2 of the largest shipping conglomerates in the hemisphere. He possessed no conception how toy wheel axles functioned. He studied it meticulously. He rotated it. He identified the small synthetic pin that required reseating into the wheel housing. He compressed it carefully with the pad of his thumb and experienced it click. He extended the vehicle back to Jasper. Jasper rotated the wheel. It spun freely. He regarded Victor with those ancient, careful eyes, and something within them shifted. Not warmth precisely, not yet, but the particular quality of a child who has updated his evaluation of an individual based on fresh data. "Thank you," Jasper articulated. "You're welcome," Victor responded. And that constituted the instant Cassandra, positioned in the kitchen entryway with a coffee vessel in both palms, rotated away so neither of them could observe her countenance. Victor remained 2 hours and 20 minutes. He did not register when the hour threshold passed. He was on the flooring constructing something architectural and increasingly precarious from wooden blocks with Eloin, while Oliver supplied a continuous critique of the structural integrity, and Jasper occupied the floor adjacent to Victor, proximate now, shoulder nearly contacting, operating the repaired remote vehicle along the perimeter of the block construction. When Cassandra finally articulated quietly, "Everyone, it's approaching dinner preparation duration," there was a chorus of objection that Victor experienced landing somewhere in the center of his chest like a clenched fist. "Can he remain for dinner?" Eloin implored. "Not this evening, sweetheart." "But why?" "Because he possesses obligations, but he can revisit." Eloin turned to Victor with the absolute, unfiltered directness of a 4-year-old. "Will you revisit?" "Affirmative," Victor stated, no hesitation. "Promise." He regarded her, this child with Cassandra's nose and his stubbornness, and her mother's absolute incapacity to accept a non-response. "I promise." At the entrance, Cassandra extended him his outerwear, and they occupied the small foyer for an instant, with the noise of the children in the adjacent chamber behind her and the stairwell behind him, and nothing between them but 6 years of stillness, that neither of them comprehended how to fracture cleanly. "They appreciate you," Cassandra articulated. She sounded as though this startled her, and she hadn't yet determined how to experience it. "Oliver's reserving judgment. Oliver reserves judgment on everyone. He's been reserving judgment on our postal carrier for 3 years. She hesitated. "Jasper permitted you to repair his vehicle." "Jasper supervised while I repaired the vehicle. There's a distinction." Something traversed Cassandra's features that was so adjacent to a smile it pained him to observe. Then it vanished. "Victor the attorney, I desire this to be civil. I don't desire a conflict." "Neither do I." "Then we need to proceed gradually, for them." "I comprehend." "And you need to understand," she arrested, recommenced. "The determinations I executed, I possess justifications. I comprehend you're furious. I comprehend you believe." "I don't comprehend what I believe yet," he articulated honestly. "That's the actuality. I'm not prepared to conduct that discourse, but I comprehend I need to conduct it." He encountered her gaze. "Soon." Cassandra examined him for a protracted interval. Then she nodded once and retreated and sealed the entrance. Victor stood on the landing for an instant before he descended the stairs. He had been a father for 2 hours and 20 minutes, officially in practice, in the actual tactile actuality of being in the identical chamber as his children and permitting them to exist around him. And the aspect that impacted him most forcefully, walking back down to the street, was not the weight of what he had forfeited. It was the terrifying, exhilarating, entirely disorienting actuality that he had not desired to depart. Victor Hale had never, in his adult existence, not desired to depart somewhere. He perpetually desired to depart. He had desired to depart dinner gatherings and charity functions and vacations and his own natal celebrations. He was an individual who traversed through spaces, not an individual who inhabited them. Cassandra had comprehended that about him and had cherished him regardless, and he had never grasped, until this instant, standing on a pavement in the March twilight, what that had actually cost her. His phone chimed. "Raymond. The Zurich delegation rescheduled for Tuesday. Mr. Hale, your mother has telephoned 5 instances today. She asserts it's urgent." "Inform her I'll telephone tomorrow." "She stated you articulated that yesterday." "Then inform her I mean it more this occasion." He terminated the call and continued walking and did not telephone his mother. He should have. Subsequently, he would comprehend that he should have telephoned her that night, should have confronted her instantly with the inquiries that were already coalescing, should not have permitted another day to elapse. But he did not yet comprehend what he was going to discover. He only comprehended the silhouette of it, the outline of an injustice that was more substantial than he had permitted himself to believe. The paternity results returned the subsequent Thursday. Victor occupied his office when his attorney telephoned, seated behind his desk for the initial occasion in days, endeavoring to attend to the requirements of his dominion, staring at the identical contract for 50 minutes when his phone activated. "It's substantiated," Patricia Okonkwo articulated. 99.998%, all 3. Victor positioned the phone on his desk without concluding the call and remained exceptionally motionless for approximately 40 seconds. Then he elevated it again. "File the acknowledgement of paternity," he articulated, "and establish the custodial consultation for subsequent week. Cassandra's attorney initially, nothing adversarial. I desire a cooperative arrangement." "Understood, and Mr. Hale, congratulations." He did not comprehend what to articulate to that. He articulated nothing and expressed gratitude and terminated the call. He did not return to the contract. He opened his desk compartment and extracted the photograph he had positioned there 4 days prior, the sole photograph he possessed of Cassandra and himself together, which his assistant had located in the archived files of his previous apartment. They were at a café, not the Copper Kettle but somewhere else, somewhere earlier, and they were laughing at something, both of them. With the absolute unself-conscious joy of individuals who do not comprehend they are being photographed, Cassandra had her palm on his forearm. He appeared younger. He appeared joyful in a manner he did not recognize in himself any longer. He returned the photograph to the compartment. He telephoned his mother. Cecilia Hale answered on the second ring, which signified she had been anticipating. "Victor, finally, I've been endeavoring to contact you for days." "I comprehend." "Raymond states you've been cancelling everything. the foundation benefit, the Zurich. Mother, his voice was exceptionally subdued, the particular subdued that, in a board session, signified someone was about to forfeit something. I need to inquire something, and I need you to respond honestly. A pulse of silence, slight, scarcely perceptible. But Victor had been interpreting silences in negotiation chambers for 17 years, and he perceived it. Of course, Cecilia articulated. When Cassandra and I dissolved the marriage, the grounds were irreparable breakdown, but Cassandra departed exceptionally abruptly, more rapidly than made logical sense for someone who, he arrested, selected the words deliberately. Someone who was not the departing category. I perpetually found that peculiar. I informed myself it was my failing, my hours, my distance, but I never entirely believed it, not completely. And presently I'm pondering whether there was something additional. Another silence, protracted. Victor, that was 6 years past, whatever justifications Cassandra possessed. Did you have any contact with Cassandra before she filed? Any contact whatsoever during that concluding year? I don't perceive why. Mother, affirmative or negative? The stillness this occasion constituted the most protracted yet, and within that stillness, something in Victor's chest became exceptionally frigid and exceptionally motionless. The manner water becomes motionless just before it solidifies. We conversed a few instances, Cecilia articulated finally. She approached me actually. She was apprehensive about the hours you were maintaining, about the trajectory. What did you communicate to her? I communicated the actuality, that you were constructing something significant and that. What did you communicate to her? Not a query, not any longer. Cecilia's tone shifted, scarcely, a degree of temperature. I communicated that an individual like you requires a particular category of partner, and that I wasn't certain she qualified. What did you communicate to her? Victor articulated for the third instance, and his voice was so subdued presently that Cecilia ceased speaking entirely. The silence extended between them across the phone connection for a protracted duration. She wasn't appropriate for you, Cecilia articulated finally. Her voice had transformed entirely now. The meticulous maternal warmth had descended, and what existed beneath was harder and more candid, and infinitely more frigid. She constituted a diversion, Victor. You were 30 years old, and you were discarding your potential on a woman with obligations and no connections and… Comprehend. He articulated it the manner you articulate things when you already comprehend the response, and are granting the other individual one concluding opportunity to communicate the actuality before you discover it independently. I safeguarded you, Cecilia articulated, the manner I have perpetually. What did you execute? And Cecilia Hale, who had constructed a career on comprehending precisely when a position was indefensible, articulated nothing. Within that nothing, Victor perceived everything. He elevated from his desk. He was not cognizant of elevating. He was cognizant of the window before him, the metropolis 59 levels below, the manner the illumination appeared exceptionally acute and exceptionally distinct and exceptionally frigid. She was gestating, he articulated. When she departed, she was gestating with my children, and you comprehended. Victor, you comprehended, and you executed something. I don't comprehend yet what you executed, but I comprehend you executed something, because Cassandra Voss does not depart. That is not who she is. She does not walk away from individuals she cherishes. She remains, and she battles, and she clutches on. And the sole element in this world that would have compelled her to inscribe her signature on those documents and vanish was, if someone supplied her justification to believe that remaining would be more catastrophic than departing. His voice was quavering presently, marginally, scarcely. The initial occasion it had quavered in more than a decade. What did you supply her, Mother? What did you exhibit her? What did you compel her to believe? Cecilia articulated, exceptionally subdued. It was essential. The world went white. Not literally, but Victor Hale had in his existence been enraged numerous instances. The frigid, contained, tactical fury of an individual who employs emotion as propellant rather than expression. He had never in his adult existence experienced what traversed through him in that instant. It was not the contained variety. It was something ancient and absolute and without edges. Essential, he reiterated gradually, as though sampling each word and discovering it toxic. My spouse, my children, 1,460 days of their existences, you determined that was essential. You would have remained with her from obligation. You would have constructed your existence around. They are my children. His voice fractured on the concluding word, just marginally, just sufficiently that both of them perceived it, and neither of them acknowledged it. They are 4 years old. They have never encountered me. Oliver has expended 4 years observing his mother sustain everything alone. Jasper repairs items silently because he's learned that's how you survive. Eloin offers scones to unfamiliar individuals because she was cultivated by someone magnanimous enough to offer everything she possesses and request nothing. He arrested, respired. And I did not comprehend. For 4 years I did not comprehend, because you determined I didn't require comprehension. Victor, please attend. Do not telephone me, he articulated. Do not telephone Raymond. Do not approach my office. Do not contact Cassandra. Do not contact my children. He arrested again. My children, I am compelled to articulate that to you. Remain distant from my children. Do you comprehend how profoundly erroneous this world has become that I am compelled to articulate that to their grandmother? He terminated the call. He stood at the window for a protracted duration. Then he seated himself on the flooring, not in a chair, on the flooring, with his back against the desk in his $5,000 attire, in the office on the 59th level of Hale Tower, and he positioned his cranium against the wood and sealed his eyes. His assistant knocked 20 minutes subsequently. Mr. Hale, you're 4 o'clock. Cancel it, Victor articulated from the flooring. A hesitation. Sir, are you? I'm adequate, Raymond. Cancel it, cancel everything today. Another hesitation. Then exceptionally cautiously, can I obtain you anything? Victor contemplated Cassandra, who had been 27 years old and gestating, and had been extended whatever his mother had manufactured. Fabricated communications, falsified evidence, artificial testimony, whatever particular cruelty Cecilia had deployed, and had formulated the determination to depart and cultivate 3 children alone rather than oppose a woman with the resources of the Hale dynasty. He contemplated what category of material you would have to be exhibited to formulate that selection. He contemplated how terrified she must have been, and how isolated, and how she had executed it regardless, had constructed an existence regardless, had cultivated 3 remarkable children regardless, with 0 assistance and 0 support from the individual who should have been positioned beside her. Negative, he articulated. Gratitude, Raymond. He remained on the flooring until the atmosphere external the window became dark. Then he elevated, donned his outerwear, and navigated 14 blocks north. He did not telephone ahead. He comprehended he should telephone ahead. He stood on the pavement external Cassandra's edifice and gazed upward at the illuminated windows of the 3rd level and extracted his phone and returned it to his pocket 3 instances. Then he pressed apartment 3B. Cassandra's voice emerged through the intercom after an instant, marginally cautious. Victor, it's nearly 9. The children are. I comprehend, he articulated. I'm not present for the children. I need to converse with you tonight, please. A protracted interval, protracted enough that he enumerated his own cardiac pulsations and attained 11 before the entrance buzzed open. She encountered him at the apartment entrance this occasion. The children were abed. He could perceive the particular stillness of an apartment containing slumbering children, which he was already learning was distinct from the stillness of an unoccupied space. She was in a cardigan and her hair was descending, and she appeared exhausted in the manner of someone who has been exhausted for years and has simply reconciled with it. She examined his countenance, and her own countenance altered. What transpired, she articulated, not a query. I conversed with my mother this evening. Cassandra became exceptionally motionless. Communicate to me what she executed, Victor articulated. I need to perceive it from you, all of it. Cassandra examined him for a protracted interval. He could observe her determining, weighing the hazard of opening this against the burden of having transporting it alone for 6 years, measuring the cost of communicating to him against the cost of continuing to safeguard him from a truth he was already halfway toward. Enter, she articulated finally. She sealed the entrance behind him. In the kitchen, she poured 2 vessels of water. Not wine, not coffee, merely water, the beverage of individuals who require absolute clarity for what approaches. She positioned one before him and retained one in her palms and stood at the counter and did not occupy a seat. She approached me when I was 11 weeks gestating, Cassandra articulated. I hadn't communicated to you yet, I was planning to that weekend, I had it arranged, she arrested. She comprehended somehow, I don't comprehend how she discovered, but she comprehended. Victor articulated nothing, he attended. She exhibited me electronic communications that appeared as though they originated from you, from your account, to a woman I didn't recognize. They were detailed, particular, the category of particular that you cannot fabricate if you don't comprehend someone. She possessed photographs. She possessed what appeared as documentation of financial transactions, hotel accommodations. She possessed, Cassandra's voice was exceptionally steady, which he recognized as her managing emotion with tremendous precision. She possessed correspondence in your penmanship, or what appeared as your penmanship, that stated you had never intended the marriage to be enduring, that you had married me because it was more convenient than concluding matters, and that you were anticipating the appropriate instant. Victor sealed his eyes. She communicated to me, Cassandra continued, that if I contested it, if I remained and endeavored to confront you or dispute any of it, she would employ her attorneys to ensure I received nothing. No settlement, no assistance. She would render the dissolution so costly and so protracted that by its conclusion I would possess nothing remaining. She hesitated. I was 11 weeks gestating. I possessed educational indebtedness. I was laboring 2 positions. And I was seated opposite a woman who possessed the resources to render that threat authentic. She ceased speaking. Victor opened his eyes. So you departed, he articulated. So I departed, she articulated. I departed and I determined that I could cultivate the infant alone. I didn't comprehend there were 3 yet, I discovered that at 14 weeks, and I determined that no child of mine was going to mature in the center of a conflict with those resources on the opposing side. She encountered his gaze. I formulated the optimal determination I could with the information I possessed, which was false, which I presently comprehend was false. But I didn't comprehend that then. Victor occupied the kitchen with this for an instant. The complete framework of the preceding 6 years, reorganizing itself around a fresh truth, every presumption he had constructed about why she departed, about what their marriage had been, about his own failings and her determinations, disintegrating and reforming into something that resembled nothing he had believed. I owe you an apology, he articulated. Cassandra blinked. You didn't comprehend. Not for what my mother executed, for what I executed before any of that. You were laboring 2 positions and I was laboring 18 hours daily, and I informed myself you comprehended, that you were patient, that there would be additional occasion. I didn't offer you additional occasion, I offered you absence and designated it ambition. He examined his palms. Even if none of the remainder had transpired, I was failing you. The remainder simply supplied you an exit through a doorway I had already fractured open. The kitchen was exceptionally silent. Cassandra positioned her water vessel on the counter. She examined him with an expression he had not observed on her countenance since before the marriage terminated. Not affection, not yet, nothing so straightforward as that, but the particular expression of a woman who is perceiving the articulation she required to perceive and is endeavoring exceptionally strenuously not to permit that to transform everything instantaneously, because she comprehends better. Because she has been scorched, because she is more intelligent presently than she was at 27, and she comprehends that articulations are not the identical entity as transformation. The children possess a regimen, she articulated finally. Saturday mornings pancakes, then the playground. You could attend Saturday, not as a visitor, as someone who's learning the regimen. Victor regarded her. Not as their father, she articulated. Not yet, but as someone who's determining how to be in their existences without detonating it. If you can commit to the ordinary Saturdays, to the pancakes and the playground and the mundane normal components, then we can discuss what approaches subsequently. I'll be present Saturday, he articulated. 7:30. 7, she articulated, because Eloin is awake at 6:30 regardless of what anyone executes about it, and by 7 the pancake negotiation has already commenced. Victor elevated to depart. At the entrance he arrested. The correspondence, he articulated, the one in my penmanship. I preserved it, Cassandra articulated quietly. I preserved everything she supplied me. It's in a folder in the rear of my closet. I preserved it because I contemplated one day you might need to observe it. He examined her. You preserved it. I'm an architect, Victor. I maintain documentation, even the documentation that fractures my heart. He stood in the entryway of the apartment where his children slumbered and examined this woman who had been extended a manufactured obliteration of everything they had constructed and had endured, had safeguarded 3 children through it, had preserved the evidence of it for 6 years without ever employing it as a weapon. And he contemplated, I have never merited you. He did not articulate it. It was excessively substantial and excessively raw and excessively early for that category of truth. But he contemplated it, standing in her entryway, and it settled into him the manner only elements that are entirely true ever do, not like a revelation, but like a recognition, like something you have perpetually comprehended finally articulating its designation aloud. Good night, Cassandra, he articulated. Good night, she articulated. He descended the stairs and emerged into the March night, and somewhere above him, in a compact, heated apartment, 3 children who were his slumbered without comprehending it, dreaming whatever 4-year-olds dream. And somewhere in the rear of a closet was a folder replete with falsehoods that had cost all of them 6 years. He was going to compel his mother to respond for every solitary day of it. But initially Saturday, pancakes, the playground, one ordinary morning at an occasion. Saturday arrived and Victor Hale manifested at 7 precisely. He had been conscious since 4:45. He had stood in his dressing chamber for 25 minutes, which was 25 minutes longer than he had ever stood in a dressing chamber in his existence, because every attire he possessed was erroneous, and he possessed nothing that was not formal business clothing or exercise equipment. He had finally donned charcoal trousers and a straightforward navy pullover that his stylist had procured for him 3 years prior, and that still had the label affixed. He incised the label off with his keys in the elevator descending. He transporting nothing. He had nearly transporting floral arrangements, had stood before a corner market at 6:55 with a bouquet of sunflowers in his grasp before returning them, because floral arrangements were for a romantic engagement. And this was not a romantic engagement. This was pancakes and a playground, and he was an individual endeavoring to learn a regimen, not an individual endeavoring to impress anyone. He arrived at the entrance with nothing but himself, which was both the most straightforward and the most terrifying element he had transporting anywhere in years. Cassandra opened the entrance before he could announce himself, which signified she had perceived him on the stairs, which signified she had been attending. From somewhere behind her Eloin's voice, "Is it him? Is it the acquaintance?" Affirmative, Cassandra called back, not withdrawing her gaze from Victor. She surveyed him once, registering the trousers, the pullover, and something in her expression shifted by one minor degree, not warmth, recognition. She retreated. "Enter. Fair caution, Oliver has already determined you're on his team for the pancake topping discussion, and Jasper is experiencing sentiments about the syrup vessel that I don't entirely comprehend yet." Victor entered. The apartment on a Saturday morning constituted a distinct nation from the apartment on a Thursday evening. The energy was horizontal rather than vertical, dispersed everywhere, low to the ground, radiating from 3 small individuals who occupied 3 distinct states of Saturday morning existence. Eloin was entirely prepared for the day, garment, footwear already donned, occupying the kitchen table with the focused impatience of someone who has been anticipating the activity to commence for what felt to her like multiple decades. Oliver was at the counter in sleeping attire, constructing the case for chocolate fragments in the pancake mixture, with the rhetorical dedication of an individual who has prepared for this argument. Jasper was positioned on the kitchen flooring, not in distress, but also not in distress, clutching the syrup vessel and examining it in the particular manner he examined things, profoundly, silently, as though he could resolve it through sustained focus. "The vessel is adhesive," Jasper articulated without glancing upward, as though this elucidated everything, and to Jasper it plainly did. "We can cleanse it," Victor articulated. Jasper glanced upward at him. "I communicated that to Mother, and she articulated after pancakes." "That appears reasonable." Jasper contemplated this. "It's adhesive presently, though." Victor crouched to Jasper's level. "May I observe it?" Jasper extended the vessel with the solemnity of an individual transferring a challenging responsibility. Victor rotated it, located the seam of dried syrup encircling the cap, and transporting it to the basin where he operated heated water over it, and dried it with a paper towel and extended it back. The entire procedure consumed 50 seconds. Jasper clutched the vessel, rotated it. The adhesion was eliminated. He regarded Victor with the measured approval he extended to solutions that actually functioned. "Thank you," Jasper articulated. He elevated from the flooring, positioned the vessel on the table, and ascended into his chair, apparently satisfied that the day could now proceed. Oliver, observing this from the counter, articulated, "He executes that, becomes fixated on elements." "I comprehend," Victor articulated. Oliver squinted at him. "How do you comprehend?" Victor hesitated. "Your mother mentioned it." Oliver accepted this and returned to his argument regarding chocolate fragments. Cassandra was observing Victor from across the kitchen with an expression she was not entirely succeeding at maintaining neutral. He intercepted her gaze. She averted it initially, which was sufficiently unusual that he registered it and articulated nothing. The pancake procedure consumed 45 minutes and generated a volume of mixture-related disorder that Victor found entirely bewilderingly absorbing. Oliver prevailed in the chocolate fragment argument through attrition. Eloin contributed strawberries without requesting, and this was accepted as an accomplished actuality. Jasper consumed his plane, which he had apparently perpetually executed, and which Cassandra articulated was simply who Jasper was, an individual who believed in elements as they were fundamentally intended. Victor consumed his with strawberries and chocolate fragments because Eloin had arranged them for him personally and regarded him expectantly, and they were objectively exceptional. "These are the superlative pancakes I've ever experienced," he articulated. Eloin radiated. "Mother fabricates them, I comprehend. She positions vanilla extract in the mixture, that's the secret." Eloin, Cassandra articulated without heat. "That's our secret." "He can comprehend," Eloin articulated with absolute confidence. "He's agreeable." The table became momentarily silent. The manner tables become silent when a child has articulated something that lands distinctively for the adults than it was intended. Cassandra elevated her coffee vessel. Victor examined his plate. Oliver, oblivious, requested a supplementary pancake. Following breakfast arrived the playground, which involved the complete logistical procedure of outerwear and footwear, and the triple stroller for the walkover, despite all three children insisting they could ambulate, and Cassandra's counterposition that the stroller was for the return voyage when they would be fatigued, and would assert they could ambulate precisely until the instant they couldn't. Victor gathered from the manner she articulated it that this constituted a pattern with extensive precedent. He propelled the stroller. He did not offer, he simply maneuvered to it while Cassandra was assisting the children into their outerwear, positioned his palms on the grip, and when Cassandra emerged from the entrance with all three children coordinated around her, she examined the stroller and then examined him and articulated nothing, which he was learning constituted Cassandra's version of acceptance. The playground was 4 blocks distant, which constituted a 12-minute voyage with 3 4-year-olds who required to examine everything. A pigeon, a fissure in the pavement, a delivery vehicle that Oliver needed to ascertain the contents of, a canine on a leash belonging to an elderly gentleman who halted entirely so all 3 children could interact with it. Victor stood clutching the stroller and observed Cassandra crouched beside them conversing with the canine, and something transpired in his chest for which he possessed no category. He had generated billions of currency and had never once, not once, stood on a pavement on a Saturday morning observing 3 children interact with an unfamiliar canine. And he could not have elucidated to anyone including himself, why this registered as more significant than any of it. At the playground, the children dispersed instantly in 3 trajectories with the synchronized disorder of individuals who have frequented this location previously and comprehend precisely where they are proceeding. Oliver to the climbing apparatus, Eloin to the sand area, Jasper to the bench adjacent to the pond where he occupied a seat, and appeared to be observing the waterfall with the focused attention he extended to everything. Victor commenced toward the climbing apparatus, and Cassandra articulated quietly from beside him, "Jasper." He rotated, examined where Jasper occupied the bench alone by the pond. "He perpetually executes that," Cassandra articulated. "He appreciates observing before he participates, but occasionally he appreciates companionship while he's observing, if the companionship is silent." Victor altered trajectory. He ambulated to the bench and occupied the seat beside Jasper, leaving a foot of space between them, and examined the waterfall. They occupied the bench for multiple minutes in absolute stillness. It was not uncomfortable. It constituted the particular, specific silence of two individuals who are constitutionally suited to quiet, and Victor experienced it, the manner you experience something that fits, with a recognition that was nearly agonizing. "The one on the left is the authority," Jasper articulated eventually. Victor examined. The waterfall on the left was indeed traversing the pond with an authority that the others appeared to navigate around. "How can you discern?" "The others reposition when he approaches, not because they're fearful, because they comprehend that's where he proceeds." Jasper hesitated. "There's a distinction." Victor regarded his son. "Affirmative," he articulated. "There is." Jasper glanced upward at him then, directly with those eyes that had been evaluating him since the initial day in the apartment. "Are you going to continue attending?" he inquired. The directness of it landed cleanly and forcefully. "Affirmative," Victor articulated. "Even when circumstances are occupied." Mother's acquaintances occasionally declare they're going to attend, and then they're occupied. "I'm going to attend," Victor articulated, "even when circumstances are occupied." Jasper examined him for another instant, then he nodded once, the manner Oliver nodded when he had attained a verdict, and returned his scrutiny to the waterfall. After another minute, he shifted 3 inches along the bench toward Victor, sealing the space between them to nearly nothing. He articulated nothing. He didn't require to. Victor occupied the bench exceptionally motionlessly, and did not move and did not speak, and was more present in that instant than he had been in any boardroom of his existence. From across the playground, Cassandra was observing them. He could perceive it. When he finally glanced over, she had already averted her gaze. The subsequent Saturday, Victor arrived at 7 again, and the Saturday following that, and the Saturday following that. By the 4th Saturday, Eloin had commenced sprinting to the entrance when she perceived his footfalls on the stairs. By the 5th, Oliver had extended to him a provisional membership in what Oliver designated the Satisfactory Individuals Collective, the criteria for which remained somewhat opaque, but appeared to include being willing to debate block structural theory for 25 minutes without examining your phone. By the 6th Saturday, Jasper had taken to reserving Victor the chair adjacent to his own at breakfast, without being requested. Cassandra observed all of it. She observed it the manner she observed Jasper observing the waterfall, accumulating information, withholding judgment, anticipating the pattern to disclose itself plainly before she trusted what she perceived. And the pattern that disclosed itself was this. Victor Hale manifested every Saturday without fail, without justification, without the category of last-minute cancellation that she had expended 7 years being offered in their marriage as a substitute for presence. He manifested, and he was entirely present when he arrived, phone in his pocket, attention undiluted, willing to be on the flooring or on the bench or at the pancake table for as prolonged as it required. He was occasionally awkward. He did not perpetually comprehend the appropriate articulation to offer. He misread Eloin's energy once and endeavored to engage her in a focused activity when what she required was to be held, and he had regarded Cassandra with such authentic bewilderment that she had been compelled to communicate to him quietly, simply elevate her. And the expression on his countenance when he did, when Eloin simply settled against his shoulder and was immediately adequate, was an expression Cassandra archived and did not examine too proximately. He was learning, visibly, honestly, without pretense. He was learning the manner adults learn elements that children render effortless, through repetition and error and correction, and the occasional mortification of being outmaneuvered by a 4-year-old. Then arrived the Tuesday in the 4th week that he did not anticipate. His phone activated at 6:48 in the morning. Cassandra. He was in the vehicle en route to the office, and the actuality that she was telephoning rather than messaging signified something was erroneous before he even responded. "Jasper has a fever," she articulated. 103. "I'm transporting him to the pediatrician, but his regular physician is unavailable, and they're assigning me whoever's accessible at 9, and Oliver and Eloin require preschool at 8:30, and I don't possess anyone to." She arrested. He could perceive her recalibrating, perceive the particular exhaustion of an individual who has been the sole available adult for 4 years and has forgotten how to request assistance. "I can determine it, I didn't comprehend if you..." I'll be present in 15 minutes, Victor articulated. Victor, you don't have to. Cassandra, quiet, certain. I'll be present in 15 minutes. He instructed the driver to reverse course. He telephoned Raymond and articulated, clear my morning. And Raymond articulated, Sir, the Singapore, and Victor articulated, clear it, Raymond, and terminated the call. He was at the apartment in 13 minutes. Cassandra opened the entrance and she appeared precisely like an individual who had been conscious since 5 with an unwell child and had been managing alone, and had executed one phone call she remained uncertain about. Victor entered, and she directed him toward Oliver and Eloin's chamber without speaking, and he proceeded. He prepared 2 4-year-olds, attired, nourished, and out the entrance to preschool in 50 minutes. This sounds straightforward. It was not straightforward. Oliver required his particular azure socks, which were in the laundry, and Victor was compelled to mediate a ceasefire in which the navy socks were accepted as equivalent. Eloin could not locate her left footwear for 11 minutes. Victor ultimately discovered it beneath the sofa behind Muffin, who appeared to have adopted it as a companion. The breakfast circumstance involved an egg that fractured incorrectly on the pan's edge and required replacement, and then a discussion regarding whether the replacement egg was the identical egg, which Victor managed by simply concurring it was the identical egg and proceeding forward. He ambulated them to preschool, 3 blocks. He clutched Eloin's hand because she extended it toward him without requesting, and Oliver ambulated beside him with his palms in his pockets, elucidating a conflict that had transpired earlier in the week with a classmate designated Thomas, who had appropriated his adhesive label without authorization, and this remained an unresolved grievance necessitating acknowledgement. That was erroneous of him, Victor articulated. I comprehend, Oliver articulated. I communicated to the instructor. Adequate. She articulated to employ my articulations. Do you contemplate your articulations succeeded? Oliver contemplated. Not yet, but I possess additional articulations. Victor compressed his knuckles against his mouth momentarily. That's the appropriate approach. At the preschool entrance, Eloin flung her upper limbs around Victor's lower extremities without warning, the full-body embrace of a child who offers affection with the completeness of someone who has never been instructed to restrain. Victor crouched and embraced her in return, and she withdrew, radiating, and sprinted inside, and Oliver articulated with greater dignity, farewell, and followed her. Victor stood on the preschool pavement for an instant after the entrance sealed. He extracted his phone, returned it, stood there. Then he ambulated back to Cassandra's apartment, where Jasper was reclining on the sofa in the particular inert misery of a feverish child, and Cassandra was on the phone with the pediatrician's office endeavoring to advance the appointment earlier. Victor occupied the sofa's edge adjacent to Jasper's feet, and Jasper, without opening his eyes, adjusted his lower extremities to create space, and then settled them against Victor's side, utilizing him as an anchor point. And Victor occupied the sofa exceptionally motionlessly and permitted him. The pediatrician examined Jasper at 9:20. Viral infection, nothing bacterial, fever management and repose and fluids. Cassandra was extended a sheet of directives she had likely memorized 4 years prior, and they ambulated home with Jasper between them, one of his hands in Cassandra's, and one, after an instant's hesitation, in Victor's. The 3 of them ambulated back to the apartment, and it was so ordinary, so entirely and devastatingly ordinary, that Victor was compelled to maintain his countenance exceptionally meticulously controlled the complete route. Jasper was slumbering on the sofa by 10. Cassandra occupied the kitchen, and Victor entered and stood in the entryway, and she was positioned at the counter with her back toward him, and her shoulders were executing something. He recognized the phenomenon, the thing individuals' shoulders execute when they are endeavoring exceptionally strenuously not to weep and are nearly succeeding. Hey, he articulated quietly. She rotated, her eyes were dry, her jaw was fixed, but he comprehended her countenance, had comprehended her countenance for 12 years, and he comprehended what resided beneath the jaw. You didn't have to attend, she articulated. I comprehend I would have determined it. I comprehend that also. She examined him. It's distinct, she articulated. Possessing someone, it's distinct. I forgot what it resembled to possess someone. She articulated it like an acknowledgement she hadn't intended to produce, like something that had emerged before she could suppress it. Victor examined her for an instant, Then he articulated, "Communicate to me what to execute. I'll prepare the coffee. I'll execute the laundry. I'll occupy space with him while he slumbers. Communicate to me what requires occurrence today and I'll execute it." Cassandra stared at him. "I'm not proceeding anywhere," he articulated. "Not today." She examined him for a protracted duration, and he could observe her computing the hazard of it, the terrible arithmetic of permitting herself to depend on someone who had once already not been present. He stood in the kitchen entryway and permitted her to compute. He did not hasten her. He did not supplement anything. "The laundry is in the receptacle by the lavatory," she articulated finally. "The colors and the whites are segregated. Do not combine them." "Acknowledged. And if Jasper awakens, he'll desire water. Ambient temperature, not chilled. Chilled water renders him experience worse." "Understood." "And don't," she arrested, recommenced. "Don't permit Muffin on the sofa with him. He'll desire Muffin present, and I comprehend it appears cruel to refuse, but the previous occasion Jasper was unwell. He awakened with feline fur in his eye and wept for 20 minutes. "I'll defend the perimeter," Victor articulated. Something in Cassandra's countenance fractured open, just marginally, just for a second. That nearly smile again, the agonizing flash of something that used to be straightforward and comfortable between them before duration and distance and betrayal and forfeiture. She rotated back to the counter. "Gratitude," she articulated with her back toward him, "for attending." "I will perpetually attend," Victor articulated. "From this point forward, I need you to comprehend that." She didn't respond, but she didn't communicate to him it wasn't accurate. He executed the laundry. He occupied space with Jasper. He defended against Muffin with moderate success. The feline breached the perimeter twice and necessitated relocation with diplomacy. At 2:30, he proceeded and retrieved Oliver and Eloin from preschool, which involved the stroller and a cessation at the corner market where Eloin required a frozen confection for Jasper, because that was what you transporting someone who was unwell, she elucidated with tremendous patience. And Victor procured frozen confections for everyone, because it appeared the appropriate determination. He was back at the apartment at 3:15. Eloin delivered Jasper's frozen confection with the solemnity of a field medic, and Jasper accepted it with a gravity that matched the gesture. Oliver occupied the flooring adjacent to the sofa and conversed with Jasper regarding what had transpired at preschool, not anticipating responses, simply supplying companionship. And Victor stood in the corridor and observed his 3 children together and experienced the particular weight of an individual who has nearly forfeited something he didn't comprehend he possessed. At 4, his phone activated. It was his mother. He had not spoken with Cecilia since the evening of their phone discourse, 13 days prior. She had telephoned 11 times. He had not responded. He examined her designation on the screen, standing in Cassandra's corridor, and he declined the call and positioned the phone in his pocket. Cassandra, emerging from the kitchen with a bowl of broth for Jasper, intercepted the expression on his countenance. "Her," she articulated. "Affirmative. What are you going to execute?" "I'm going to hold her accountable," Victor articulated. "Legally, if there exists a mechanism, and personally, absolutely, but not today." He examined his phone. "Today I'm present." Cassandra nodded gradually. She transporting the broth to Jasper. Oliver instantly desired to comprehend whether there was additional broth. Eloin desired to comprehend whether her frozen confection had constituted sufficient medicine for Jasper or whether he required another. And Victor Hale stood in the corridor of a compact apartment on a Tuesday afternoon in a navy pullover with no label on it, with laundry in the dryer and a feline-related security failure on his record and 3 children in the adjacent chamber who were his. And he contemplated, with a clarity that was nearly violent in its completeness, this is the sole element that signifies anything. Not the tower, not the portfolio. Not the dominion his mother had determined his marriage was interfering with. This broth and this frozen confection and this feline and these 3 individuals who had learned to be their own minor nation because he hadn't been present to be part of the populace. He ambulated into the living chamber, occupied the flooring adjacent to the sofa. Oliver instantly approached and occupied the space beside him and resumed the Thomas-and the adhesive label grievance from the morning, updating Victor on the status of the articulations. Jasper, from the sofa, extended downward and positioned his palm on Victor's shoulder without glancing at him, merely a contact, merely a point of connection, like extending towards something solid when the ground is uncertain. Victor positioned his palm over his son's, and from the kitchen entryway, Cassandra observed the two of them, this individual and her boy, this boy and his father. And for the initial time in 6 years, she permitted herself to experience something she had expended 6 years refusing to experience. Not trust, not yet. Not absolution, not quite. But the initial atom of something that could become those elements, given sufficient ordinary Saturdays and sufficient Tuesdays when he manifested, without being requested, and sufficient mornings with the appropriate socks, and the erroneous egg and a misplaced footwear behind the feline. The initial atom of something that had once, a considerable duration past, been the most natural element in the world. It terrified her. She rotated back to the kitchen before he could observe her countenance. But she did not reposition the barrier entirely upward, and that, in the particular language of Cassandra Voss, was everything. By that week's conclusion, the custodial arrangement had been informally concurred upon between the attorneys. 3 weekdays, alternating weekends, structured but adaptable, designed around educational schedules and the children's requirements, and the shared comprehension that neither Victor nor Cassandra desired this to be a conflict. Patricia Okonkwo telephoned Victor on Friday to substantiate the terms, and then articulated nearly as an aside, "I've also been contacted by a private investigator who collaborates with the firm. He's been examining the documentation your mother employed, at your request. He possesses something." Victor sat forward. "When can he convene?" "Monday, Victor," she hesitated. "It's substantial. I desire you to be braced." He articulated he would be braced. And he expended the weekend at Cassandra's apartment on Saturday, and did not contemplate Monday, and concentrated entirely on pancakes and the playground, and the waterfall and the adhesive label grievance, which Oliver had updated to include a formal apology from Thomas that he had adjudged insufficient, but was contemplating accepting provisionally. Monday arrived regardless, as Mondays do. The investigator's designation was Marcus Chen, and he constituted the category of individual who delivered catastrophic information in a flat, professional tone that somehow rendered it more severe. He occupied the seat opposite Victor in a consultation chamber at the law firm, opened a folder, and articulated without preamble, "The electronic communications were manufactured by a firm your mother has employed previously. They execute high-level document fabrication. We possess the original metadata from the server. The transmission dates were retroactively applied, and the account utilized was a duplicate of yours, not your actual account. We can substantiate it." Victor examined the documentation. "The photographs," Chen continued, "are composite, authentic photographs of you, backgrounds and context modified, professionally executed, not inexpensive." "The correspondence," Victor articulated. Chen opened another section of the folder. "Penmanship analysis. Your mother possessed access to your penmanship samples through the estate documentation. The correspondence is a fabrication, exceptionally high quality, but the letter spacing in the lowercase is inconsistent with your natural script. Our analyst is prepared to provide testimony." Victor occupied the space with this for a protracted instant. "She compensated for all of it," he articulated, "not a query. The disbursements are traceable through a shell account she's utilized for foundation distributions, obscured but not sufficiently. The documentation exists." Chen sealed the folder. "You possess grounds for a fraud claim, potentially criminal interference with familial rights, document fabrication. The district attorney's office would express considerable interest." Victor examined the folder. At 6 years condensed into evidence, at the particular, detailed, costly cruelty of what his mother had assembled to demolish his marriage and appropriate his children. "Provide everything to my attorney," he articulated, "all of it." He elevated. He shook Chen's hand. He ambulated out of the consultation chamber into the corridor and stood against the wall for an instant with his eyes sealed. His mother had not committed an error. She had not acted in an instant of fury or trepidation or impulse. She had orchestrated it, had engaged professionals, had constructed a precise and deliberate framework of falsehoods designed to appear as truth, delivered to a gestating woman alone, calculated to generate precisely the outcome that had transpired. 6 years. He extracted his phone and telephoned Cassandra. She responded on the second ring. In the background, he could perceive the concluding portion of the educational collection: noise, voices, small footwear on concrete. Cassandra. Victor. I possess the evidence, he articulated. All of it, demonstrable fabrications. My attorney possesses everything. A silence, protracted sufficient that he perceived one of the children articulate something to Cassandra and perceived Cassandra articulate quietly, "1 second, sweetheart." Cassandra, he articulated, I am so profoundly remorseful. I comprehend that's inadequate. I comprehend there exists no version of those two articulations that encompasses 6 years, but I need to articulate it. I am so profoundly remorseful. Another silence. When Cassandra spoke, her voice was exceptionally steady and exceptionally subdued. Attend for dinner this evening, she articulated. Not Saturday, this evening. Attend and consume dinner with us and assist with the bath and the bedtime and the entire terrible negotiation regarding how many narratives is sufficient narratives. Attend and simply be present. Agreed. Victor compressed his available palm flat against the wall behind him. I'll be present at 6, he articulated. 6:30, Cassandra articulated, because Eloin refuses to approach the table before 6:30 regardless of what occurs. 6:30, he articulated. He stood in the corridor for an instant after she terminated the call. Then he straightened his attire and ambulated back toward the elevator, past the glass walls of the consultation chambers, past the metropolis discernible through the edifice windows in the afternoon illumination, past the complete apparatus of a world he had constructed and operated and dwelled within for 17 years. He possessed somewhere to be at 6:30, the remainder of it would wait. Dinner at 6:30 became dinner at 6:30 every Tuesday and Thursday, and then Wednesday also. And then the Saturdays extended past the playground into the afternoon and occasionally into the evening. And no one formally determined this was transpiring, it simply accumulated. The manor water accumulates in low terrain, locating its level by the trajectory of least resistance. Victor had been a father in practice for 7 weeks when Cecilia Hale materialized at his office. He had comprehended she would arrive eventually. He had filed the fraud documentation with his attorney and had instructed Patricia Okonkwo to commence the procedure of what would become a civil suit: fraud, fabrication, intentional interference with familial rights. And he had comprehended that the instant those documents were served to his mother's legal team, she would cease telephoning and commence manifesting. Cecilia Hale had not constructed her position in the world by remaining on the telephone. She occupied his reception chamber at 9 in the morning on a Wednesday, seated in the chair nearest the elevator with her outerwear donned, and her posture in the particular register of a woman who has determined she will not be rendered to experience like a supplicant in her own son's edifice. Raymond encountered Victor at the elevator with an expression that was as adjacent to alarm as Raymond ever achieved. She's been present since 8:20, Raymond articulated quietly. She communicated to security she possessed an appointment. She does not possess an appointment. I comprehend. Victor extended Raymond his satchel. Grant me 10 minutes. He ambulated into the reception chamber. Cecilia glanced upward. She was 74 years old and she appeared it, for the initial occasion in Victor's memory. Not aged precisely, not diminished, but the particular age of someone who has been transporting a secret for 6 years and has just had it extracted from them. There were elements around her eyes that he had not observed previously. You served me, she articulated, not an accusation, a statement. Affirmative. Your father's corporate attorney telephoned me this morning. The board has been notified. I comprehend. She elevated. She remained taller than most chambers extended her credit for Cecilia Hale. She had perpetually possessed the capacity to occupy space in a manner that rendered other individuals smaller. It was not functioning on Victor this morning. I would appreciate conversing with you privately. Negative, Victor articulated. She blinked. Victor, we are not executing this privately, Mother. Everything between us from this point forward proceeds through legal counsel. He maintained his voice exceptionally level. You possessed your private discourse with me. You communicated to me it was essential. I've perceived what you had to articulate regarding it. Cecilia's jaw tightened. I executed what I believed was appropriate for you. You manufactured documentation. You engaged professionals to construct falsehoods, and you delivered them to my gestating spouse when she was isolated and terrified, and you threatened her with the complete legal weight of this family. He articulated it the manner he articulated elements in Chambers, when he required everyone present to comprehend there existed no version of this where they were prevailing. You did not execute that for me. You executed that for yourself, because she was not what you had orchestrated, and you determined your orchestration signified more than my family. You would have surrendered everything for her, you were already. Affirmative, Victor articulated, I would have, and that constituted my right. He examined his mother, this woman who had cultivated him, who had instructed him to interpret a financial statement at 12 and a negotiation chamber at 15, who had been the dominant force in his existence for as prolonged as he could recollect. And he experienced the particular grief of cherishing someone and being incapable of absolving them, the two elements existing concurrently without resolving each other. I possess 3 children, mother. My son Jasper contemplates exceptionally meticulously before he trusts anyone, because he was cultivated in a world where the individual who should have been his father wasn't present. My son Oliver has been the individual of the household since he could ambulate, because there was no other individual available. My daughter Eloise extends everything she possesses to everyone she encounters, because her mother instructed her generosity is how you survive a world that hasn't extended you sufficient. His voice remained level through all of it, barely. That is what you manufactured. Cecilia articulated nothing. The suit proceeds, Victor articulated. My attorney will be in contact with yours. You will not contact Cassandra. You will not contact the children. He hesitated. I'm remorseful, it's this, I authentically am, but you rendered it this. He ambulated into his office and sealed the entrance. He stood at the window for 4 minutes. Then he occupied his desk and opened his calendar, and there at 6:30 was a notation Raymond had supplemented. Dinner. He examined it for an instant, then he opened the Singapore file and proceeded to work. That evening, he communicated to Cassandra about the confrontation over dinner, while Oliver negotiated the vegetable circumstance, and Eloise provided fragments of her poultry to muffin beneath the table in a manner she believed was imperceptible to adults. How did it experience? Cassandra inquired quietly beneath the noise of the children. Like sealing a doorway that should have been sealed years past, he articulated, and like forfeiting something concurrently. Cassandra examined him. She remains your mother. I comprehend. That doesn't excuse what she executed. I comprehend that also, but you're permitted to grieve it, Cassandra articulated. The relationship you contemplated you possessed, it's an authentic forfeiture, even if she occasioned it. She articulated it with the directness of a physician, clinical and compassionate concurrently. And Victor examined her across a table, concealed in the debris of dinner, with 3 4-year-olds, and contemplated, not for the initial occasion, that she was the most candid individual he had ever comprehended. Gratitude, he articulated. For what? For that, for articulating it like it's permitted. Cassandra maintained his gaze for an instant. Then Eloise toppled her milk vessel, and the instant dissolved into the controlled disorder of clean-up and recriminations and Muffin's opportunistic interest in the spillage, and Victor seized the roll of paper towels from the counter and managed the immediate crisis, and existence continued its boisterous, imperfect, essential forward motion. 2 weeks subsequently he communicated to the children. It was a Saturday after pancakes before the playground. He and Cassandra had discussed it 4 instances during the week. How, when, what articulations, in what sequence. Cassandra had consulted a child psychologist she trusted, who supplied them a framework, straightforward language, unambiguous actualities, no over-elucidation. Respond to the inquiries they actually pose rather than the ones you anticipate. Permit them to lead. Don't render it a performance. The 3 of them occupied the table, still in their Saturday morning states, Oliver alert and already attired, Jasper with his particular syrup vessel positioned precisely, Eloise in sleeping attire with syrup on her features from a pancake she had consumed with more enthusiasm than precision. Victor glanced at Cassandra. She supplied him a minor nod. I need to communicate to you all something significant, Victor articulated. Oliver glanced upward instantly, his countenance transitioning to its interpreting the chamber expression. Eloise paused mid-consumption, Jasper did not move, but his quality of stillness transformed. He was attending with his complete form. You comprehend how I've been attending every Saturday, and some evenings also. And Tuesdays and Thursdays, Oliver articulated, precise. Affirmative, and the justification I attend, the authentic justification, is because you three are my children. Silence. Eloin's countenance executed something complex, processing, like a minor apparatus laboring through a substantial file. Oliver articulated exceptionally meticulously, what do you signify? I signify I'm your father, Victor articulated. I'm your dad. I comprehend that's a substantial element to perceive, and I comprehend you possess inquiries, and I desire to respond to all of them. But that's the actuality. Another silence, protracted. Eloin articulated, like an authentic dad. Affirmative. Like permanently. Victor's voice, which he had maintained entirely steady through the delivery of the information, executed something minor and involuntary at that inquiry. Affirmative, he articulated, like permanently. Eloin rotated to Cassandra. Mother, he's our dad. Affirmative, sweetheart, Cassandra articulated. He is. Eloin rotated back to Victor with an expression of such absolute, uncomplicated delight that it impacted him like a wave. I comprehended you were sufficiently agreeable to be a dad, she proclaimed. And she maneuvered off her chair and ambulated around the table and ascended into his lap with the absolute confidence of someone who has simply substantiated a thing she already suspected. And settled there like she had perpetually occupied that space, and elevated her fork and continued consuming her pancakes. Victor occupied the chair exceptionally motionlessly with his daughter in his lap, and did not trust his countenance. Oliver had not moved. He was examining the table, his jaw executing the phenomenon it executed when he was contemplating strenuously. Jasper was also motionless, his eyes on his plate. Why didn't you attend previously? Oliver articulated. His voice was controlled, not furious, not yet processing. Victor had braced for this inquiry. He and Cassandra had discussed it meticulously, how much actuality was appropriate for a 4-year-old, the boundary between honesty and burdening a child with adult failings. Because I didn't comprehend about you, Victor articulated. I didn't comprehend you existed, and when I discovered, I attended as rapidly as I could. Oliver glanced upward. You didn't comprehend. Negative, I discovered the day we encountered at the café. Do you recollect that day? Oliver was silent, contemplating backward. The scone day, he articulated. Affirmative, that's when I discovered. Oliver processed this for a protracted instant. Victor anticipated, not hastening. Then Oliver articulated, that must have constituted a substantial astonishment. The most substantial of my existence, Victor articulated honestly. Oliver appeared to find this satisfactory, in a manner that was exceptionally Oliver. He had inquired for the actuality. He had received the actuality. He had determined the actuality to be internally consistent, and he could now continue. He elevated his fork. Jasper still had not spoken. Victor examined his middle son. Jasper was examining his plate, and his countenance was executing something private and meticulous. Cassandra executed a minor motion from her end of the table. Should I? And Victor shook his cranium just barely. He anticipated. After nearly 2 complete minutes, Jasper articulated without glancing upward, I contemplated you might be. Victor blinked. You did. Jasper glanced upward. I contemplated you might be our dad because of your countenance. He articulated it straightforwardly, as though this were apparent, and because of the manner mother examines you. Cassandra produced a sound that she converted into a cough. You didn't articulate anything, Victor stated. I was anticipating to observe if you were going to depart, Jasper articulated. Entirely direct, entirely matter of fact, the most catastrophic element Victor had perceived in 48 hours. I'm not departing, Victor articulated. Jasper examined him for a protracted instant. Then he extended across the table and elevated the syrup vessel and presented it to Victor, which was, Victor had come to comprehend over 7 weeks, the most elevated form of trust Jasper Hale dispensed. Victor accepted the syrup vessel. His hand was not entirely steady. He poured syrup on a pancake he had already concluded and positioned the vessel back down, and Jasper observed the complete sequence with those meticulous eyes, and then, finally, something in them settled. Acceptable, Jasper articulated, just that, acceptable, and returned to his breakfast. The playground that Saturday was distinct from every playground before it, not in any perceptible manner that another individual would have registered, but Eloin clutched Victor's hand and designated him Dad for the initial occasion while they were ambulating. Dad, observed the canine. And Victor ceased ambulating for a complete second before he recovered, and Oliver, at the climbing apparatus, bellowed, Dad, observe this, before he'd consciously registered what he was articulating. And Victor observed, and when Oliver attained the summit, Oliver glanced downward with an expression of such unguarded pride that Victor was compelled to avert his gaze for an instant at something neutral. Jasper, by the waterfall pond, occupied the space beside Victor in their customary stillness, and after a duration articulated, The authority waterfall possesses a designation presently. I designated him. What did you designate him? Jasper contemplated the solemnity of the disclosure. Reginald, he articulated. Victor examined the waterfall. Reginald is an adequate designation. I contemplated so, Jasper hesitated. You can designate him Reginald also, if you desire. Victor regarded his son. Gratitude, Jasper. You're welcome, Jasper articulated, and leaned against Victor's upper limb. The days coordinated themselves around a fresh framework. Victor's apartment, the triplex on the 71st level, with its curated stillness and its vista, and its absolute absence of syrup vessels and grey felines and wooden blocks, commenced to experience less like habitation and more like accommodation. He commenced locating justifications to be elsewhere. He attended for dinners that extended past bedtime, past the three-narrative negotiation, past the concluding drink of water, and the final instant proclamation that someone required to utilize the lavatory. He assisted Cassandra with folding laundry on Tuesday evenings. He learned that Eloin required 3 melodies before she would slumber, and that the third one had to be the identical every occasion, a particular melody Cassandra had fabricated years prior, which Victor requested her to instruct him, and which he learned poorly and vocalized more poorly, and which Eloin accepted without objection. He learned that Jasper's night terrors, when they arrived, necessitated nothing more than a palm on his back and stillness, that the most detrimental element you could execute was speak or activate illumination, and that if you simply remained and respired gradually, Jasper's respiration would eventually synchronize with yours, and he would return to slumber. He learned this because he was present one Thursday evening when it transpired, and Cassandra was already in the entryway appearing exhausted, and he articulated quietly, I possess this. And she had examined him for one protracted second and then retreated. He occupied space with Jasper in the darkness for 45 minutes. When he emerged, Cassandra was still conscious, occupying the sofa with a vessel of tea, and she examined him with an expression he possessed no designation for. He's adequate, Victor articulated. I comprehend, she articulated. He perpetually is, it simply requires duration. Does it transpire frequently? Less than it used to. She enveloped both palms around her vessel. He commenced slumbering better approximately 9 weeks past. 9 weeks past was when Victor had commenced attending for dinners. Neither of them articulated this aloud. Victor occupied the opposing terminus of the sofa. It was 11:40 on a Thursday evening, and he possessed a 7 o'clock board consultation in the morning, and he did not move to depart. I desire to inquire you something, Cassandra articulated, and I desire you to respond honestly, not helpfully, honestly. Acceptable. Is this sustainable for you? The schedule, the dinners, the evenings, your corporation is functioning adequately, he articulated. Victor. It is. Raymond has redesigned the structure around my availability. The executive team is more capable than I've extended them credit for, because I never extended them the opportunity to be. The corporation does not necessitate me present 14 hours daily. It necessitates me for the elements only I can execute, and those are 4, perhaps 5 hours of actual irreplaceable labor. He hesitated. Everything additional was simply occupation. I was occupying myself. I didn't possess anywhere else to be. Cassandra was silent for an instant. And presently you do. And presently I do. She examined him with that measuring expression. the one that had not entirely dissipated and might not entirely dissipate for a considerable duration, and he accepted that. He accepted the measurement. He had merited it, or rather, merited the necessity of it, through years of absence that preceded even the dissolution. He would stand in the entryway of her trust for as prolonged as it required for the entrance to open further. Then, in the 5th week of November, Jasper became unwell again. Not a contagion this occasion. Victor was at the office on a Monday morning when Cassandra telephoned, and her voice was distinct from the Tuesday fever call. This was a distinct register entirely, stripped of the meticulous control she typically maintained, and he was elevating before she concluded the initial sentence. The pediatrician dispatched him to the hospital, she articulated. He's been pallid for a few weeks. I contemplated it was the season, but his blood analysis, Victor, his counts are erroneous. They're executing additional examinations. I'm at Crestwood Medical. I'm in the pediatric division. The children are at educational institution, and I don't comprehend how prolonged I'm going to be present, and I don't possess anyone to. I'm attending, Victor articulated. I'm already attending. I'll retrieve Oliver and Eloin after educational institution. Telephone me when you possess anything. He was at Crestwood Medical within 22 minutes. Cassandra occupied a small consultation chamber on the 5th level, and when she perceived him, she executed something she had not executed in his presence in 6 years. She traversed the chamber and positioned her forehead against his shoulder, not weeping, not fracturing, simply necessitating for 1 second to be sustained by something external to herself. Victor positioned his upper limbs around her and stood exceptionally motionlessly, and permitted her 30 seconds of it and articulated nothing. Then she withdrew and straightened, and her countenance returned to the version of itself that could function under pressure. They're articulating the white cell pattern might indicate, she arrested. They're articulating they desire to exclude leukemia. The designation landed in the consultation chamber like something corporeal. Victor occupied the chair beside her and accepted her palm. Not romantically, the manner you clutch someone's hand when the information is excessively substantial to process while standing. Acceptable, he articulated. What do they necessitate? Additional examinations, a bone marrow sample to substantiate or exclude, results within 48 to 72 hours. Acceptable, he was already contemplating, premier hematologists, premier pediatric oncologists, which medical facilities possess the most advanced protocols, which investigators he comprehended personally who could be contacted directly. He maintained all of that internally. None of it constituted what she necessitated at this instant. I'm present, whatever the subsequent phase is, we execute it collectively. Cassandra examined their joined palms. I'm terrified, she articulated exceptionally quietly, not like an acknowledgement, more like an actuality she was designating, because designating elements was how she processed them. Me also, Victor articulated. It constituted the most candid element he had articulated in years. He was terrified in a manner that was entirely novel, not the trepidation of forfeiting currency or forfeiting a negotiation or forfeiting the corporation, none of which had ever authentically frightened him. This was the trepidation of forfeiting an individual, a small individual with meticulous eyes, and a designation for a waterfall and the particular wisdom of a child who had learned early that not everyone who arrived was going to remain. The 72 hours constituted the most protracted of Victor's existence. He traversed between the hospital and the apartment, between Cassandra and the children, maintaining the apparatus of typical existence functioning for Oliver and Eloin, who comprehended Jasper was in the hospital, and who were communicated it was because the physicians required to examine some elements, and who accepted this with the trust of children who have been communicated the actuality consistently sufficient to believe it when it arrives in simplified form. Oliver, on the second evening, entered the kitchen while Victor was preparing dinner and articulated without preamble, "Is Jasper going to be acceptable?" Victor rotated from the stove, examined Oliver, contemplated the straightforward response and the authentic one, and selected the authentic one. "I don't comprehend yet," he articulated. "We're anticipating discovering, but I can communicate to you that the physicians are exceptionally proficient and that your mother and I are executing everything possible." Oliver was silent for an instant. "What's everything possible?" "It signifies we're not desisting," Victor articulated. Regardless of what the subsequent phase is, we don't desist. Oliver examined him, then he nodded once and articulated, "Acceptable," and proceeded and arranged the table without being requested. The results arrived on a Thursday afternoon. Victor was at the hospital when the hematologist entered, a precise, compassionate woman designated Dr. Sharma, who occupied the seat opposite both of them and delivered the information clearly. It constituted an early-phase condition, not the most aggressive variant, captured sufficiently early that treatment alternatives were robust. There was a variant, however, in Jasper's particular presentation that rendered his case more complex. He would necessitate a bone marrow transplantation, the optimal outcomes derived from a biological sibling or parental match. Victor articulated before Dr. Sharma had concluded the sentence, "Examine me." Cassandra rotated to examine him. "Examine me today," Victor articulated, "this instant, whatever the procedure is." Dr. Sharma examined him. "Are you the biological father?" "Affirmative," Victor articulated, "substantiated by paternity documentation." "Then we'll obtain your typing today." She produced a notation. "Mr. Hale, I desire to be transparent that a parental match is viable but not guaranteed to be optimal. We'll also type the siblings." "All of it," Victor articulated, "whatever extends Jasper the optimal probability." Cassandra was examining him with an expression he could not interpret entirely, something layered and complex and operating deeper than the immediate instant. He encountered her gaze and maintained it, and she averted it initially. And he comprehended, in the manner he was learning to interpret her silences, that she was not averting her gaze because she was unsettled. She was averting her gaze because she was endeavoring exceptionally strenuously not to permit the element she was experiencing to manifest. He constituted a match, not an ideal match, Dr. Sharma elucidated the gradations, but sufficiently robust, more than viable. And in the particular profile of Jasper's condition, the biological father match transporting particular advantages. Victor occupied her office and attended to the medical particulars with the focused attention he had once reserved for financial analysis. And comprehended, this was the most significant negotiation of his existence, and the terms were not currency, and the currency was not leverage. The currency was being present, being the appropriate individual in the appropriate location at the appropriate instant. He articulated affirmative before she concluded the sentence. The procedure was scheduled for 3 weeks distant to permit preparation on both sides. Victor expended those 3 weeks attending the hospital with Jasper for every appointment, learning the rhythms of pediatric oncology, learning which nurses Jasper had determined to trust, and which ones he was still reserving judgment on, learning that Jasper in a hospital garment was still Jasper. Still silent, still observant, still the initial to register when Victor's coffee vessel required replenishing in the waiting chamber, indicating it with the identical wordless helpfulness he extended to everything. 2 days before the procedure, Jasper articulated, "Are you terrified?" Victor examined him. They were occupying the hospital waiting chamber, anticipating a pre-procedure examination, and Jasper had posed the inquiry the identical manner he posed everything, without preamble, without softening, with absolute directness. "Marginally," Victor articulated. "Primarily, I'm simply focused on what arrives subsequently." "Me also," Jasper articulated. "Mother's more terrified. She executes the phenomenon with her palms." "What phenomenon?" Jasper demonstrated, compressing the pads of the digits together exceptionally slightly. "She executes it when she's endeavoring not to exhibit it, like you execute with your countenance." Victor regarded his son. This child who catalogued the individuals he cherished with the precision of a scientist and the tenderness of someone who comprehended that attending constituted its own form of care. "You register everything," Victor articulated. "I comprehend," Jasper articulated, not proudly, simply as an actuality. "Is it fatiguing?" Jasper contemplated this earnestly. "Occasionally," he articulated, "but primarily I appreciate it. It signifies I comprehend what individuals necessitate before they articulate it." He hesitated. "You necessitated someone to occupy the space beside you on the bench that initial day at the playground." Victor occupied the space with that for an instant. "Affirmative," he articulated. "I did." "I comprehended," Jasper articulated, and leaned against his upper limb in their customary configuration, and the waiting chamber continued its ordinary waiting chamber operations around them. The procedure transpired on a Tuesday morning in December, sufficiently early that the hospital remained in its silent pre-visitor hours. Cassandra clutched Jasper's hand proceeding inward, and Victor ambulated on the opposing side. And at the entrance of the procedure chamber, Jasper arrested and examined both of them and articulated with absolute solemnity, "Reginald will be acceptable while I'm in present." It required both of them an instant to comprehend. He signified the waterfall. "Reginald will be adequate," Cassandra articulated with remarkable composure. "He's managed without us previously," Victor articulated. Jasper nodded, satisfied, and entered. Victor's portion of the procedure was executed initially. Extraction, which was uncomfortable in a manner he had been communicated to anticipate, and which he endured with the particular focused patience of an individual who has identified the sole acceptable outcome and is committed to it. He was in recovery when Cassandra arrived to locate him, and she occupied the chair adjacent to the bed, and they anticipated together, for the transfer to complete, for Jasper to be relocated to the recovery chamber, for the hours to elapse in the particular suspension of hospital duration. It succeeded. Not instantly. Recovery was measured in weeks in meticulous monitoring and blood counts and follow-up consultations and Dr. Sharma's cautious, precise optimism, but it succeeded. Jasper's counts commenced normalizing. The pigmentation returned to his countenance. He requested from his hospital bed an update on Reginald, which Victor supplied by proceeding to the playground and transmitting a photograph. Jasper examined the photograph for a protracted duration. Then he articulated, "He appears adequate," with the satisfaction of an individual whose affairs are in order. 3 weeks into Jasper's recovery, on a Wednesday evening, Cassandra and Victor occupied the kitchen table after the children were abed, not discoursing about anything urgent, the debris of dinner encompassing them, muffin on the chair between them, the particular exhausted tranquility of a dwelling where 3 children are slumbering. Cassandra articulated, "I've been contemplating the apartment." Victor examined her. "This one," she articulated, "it's becoming excessively compact, with you present the majority of the duration. The children are sharing a chamber and Oliver has commenced objecting about the architectural constraints of his space, which is a direct citation." Victor was exceptionally motionless. "What are you contemplating?" Cassandra examined the table, then examined him. "I'm contemplating that we've been executing this for, 3 months, and you're present nearly every evening, and the children have ceased distinguishing between the evenings you're present and the evenings you're not, in any manner that suggests they contemplate the evenings you're not present are typical." She hesitated. "I'm not endeavoring to render this into something it isn't yet, but I'm articulating that the practical actuality of the circumstance is." "I'll locate a location," Victor articulated, "more spacious, identical neighborhood, something with a chamber for each of them and space that's authentically ours, not my triplex." He hesitated. "Not anything that resembles mine, something that resembles all of us." Cassandra examined him for a protracted instant. "I'm not prepared to designate it everything yet," she articulated. Careful, candid, the manner she was perpetually candid even when it cost her. "I comprehend," he articulated. "I'm not requesting you to designate it anything. I'm inquiring whether we can investigate." She was silent. "Collectively," he articulated, "simply investigate." Cassandra elevated her vessel, positioned it down, examined the table for an instant with the expression of a woman who was executing an exceptionally meticulous computation in an exceptionally complex ledger. Then she articulated without glancing upward, "Saturday, the children's, a real estate agent from Oliver's preschool parent collective possesses listings. She stated she'd exhibit us 3 locations." Victor's voice when it arrived was exceptionally controlled. "Saturday functions." 7, Cassandra articulated, because Eloin is awake at 6:30 regardless of what anyone executes about it," Victor articulated. "I comprehend." Cassandra examined him, and this occasion she did not avert her gaze initially. She permitted him to perceive what was in her countenance, not all of it, not yet, perhaps not for a considerable duration yet, but sufficient, the initial authentic sufficient of it. The commencement of something that had once, years past, in a small café with enchanted scones, been the most natural element in the world, and was locating its trajectory through all the damage and all the forfeiture and all the ordinary Tuesday evenings and Saturday pancakes and waterfall pond silences back toward the surface. "Good night, Victor," she articulated. "Good night," he articulated. He obtained his outerwear. He arrested at Jasper's entrance on the route out, left it ajar a fracture, the manner Jasper appreciated it, sufficient illumination from the corridor to render the darkness manageable. Oliver was a motionless silhouette beneath his covering. Eloin had migrated laterally in her slumber in a manner that suggested she would be halfway off the mattress by morning. He stood in the corridor and examined his children, and experienced the particular weight of an individual who has been extended back something he didn't comprehend he possessed, and who comprehends with his complete self the cost of nearly not obtaining it back. He descended the stairs and emerged into the December night. Saturday, he contemplated, simply continue manifesting. Saturday arrived and they examined 3 apartments. The initial was excessively formal, elevated ceilings and white partitions and the category of silence that would not endure 3 days with Oliver and Jasper and Eloin, let alone a lifespan. The second was excessively compact, scarcely more spacious than Cassandra's present location, and Oliver traversed through it in 50 seconds and articulated, "This is identical," with the flat certainty of a child who does not perceive the purpose of relocation without improvement. The third was on the 4th level of a brownstone 14 blocks from Cassandra's present edifice, 8 blocks from the preschool, 5 blocks from the playground with the waterfall pond. It possessed 5 chambers. It possessed a kitchen sufficiently spacious for pancake fabrication at scale. It possessed a corridor sufficiently protracted that Eloin instantly sprinted its complete length and back, which appeared to be her primary criterion for habitable space. It possessed a window seat in the most spacious chamber, where Jasper occupied the seat without being invited and examined the street below with the expression of someone who has located the appropriate location and intends to remain. Oliver stood in the center of what would be the living chamber and rotated gradually in a complete circle, evaluating. Then he articulated, "The architectural constraints present are acceptable." Cassandra examined Victor across the unoccupied chamber. Victor examined her back. "We'll accept the application documentation," Cassandra communicated to the agent. They inscribed the lease on a Thursday in January, both of them designated side by side on the documentation, and the agent produced a commentary about what a beautiful family they constituted, and Cassandra articulated, "Gratitude." And Victor articulated nothing, because everything he might have articulated was excessively substantial for a leasing office. They relocated on a Saturday in February, 2 days before the triplets turned 5. The relocation itself constituted organized disorder of a particular and exhausting category. Victor had engaged professional movers, but had not anticipated that 3 5-year-olds would treat the relocation procedure as an interactive experience necessitating their complete participation. Which signified Eloin restructured the carton labeling system to her own specifications. Oliver supplied a continuous operational commentary that was authentically more precise than the mover's own coordination, and Jasper relocated one particular item, his syrup vessel, transporting personally by hand, and then supervised everything additional from a position of strategic oversight. By 7 in the evening, sufficient of the furnishings were in approximately the appropriate chambers that the apartment was functional if not systematized. Cassandra prepared pasta on the new appliance, because it constituted the one element she could prepare with a vessel and a pan and whatever had endured the relocation in accessible containers. They consumed it on the flooring of the living chamber because the table remained in 4 components in the corner, all 5 of them, with muffins circling the pasta vessel with the focused optimism of an animal who has identified a structural vulnerability in the dinner supervision. Oliver articulated, "This pasta is adequate, but the table circumstance is problematic." "The table will be assembled tomorrow," Victor articulated. "By whom?" "By me." Oliver examined him with the expression he reserved for assertions that necessitated verification. "Do you comprehend how to assemble tables?" "I assembled Jasper's remote vehicle wheel." "That was one component." "I'll determine it," Victor articulated. Jasper, without glancing upward from his pasta, articulated, "I'll assist." And Eloin articulated, I'll observe, which constituted Eloin's candid and self-cognizant contribution to most corporeal tasks. Following dinner, following the bath negotiation, following the 3-narrative minimum requirement was satisfied with 2 narratives from Cassandra, and 1 from Victor, in which he was necessitated to improvise a continuation of a narrative about a waterfall-designated Reginald, who apparently possessed an ongoing adventure chronicle that Victor had not comprehended existed, and had to be briefed on mid-performance by Jasper in whispered, urgent installments. Following all of it, following the corridor illumination was left activated at the precise angle Jasper necessitated, and Eloin's third melody was vocalized poorly and accepted graciously, and Oliver had conducted a concluding structural evaluation of his new chamber and designated it provisionally satisfactory. Following all of it, Victor and Cassandra stood in the kitchen of the new apartment. It was 10:50. The apartment was silent in the manner of a location that has just been occupied for the initial occasion. Cassandra possessed her coffee and Victor possessed his, and they stood on opposing sides of the kitchen island, and neither of them spoke for an instant. "We are executing this," Cassandra articulated, "not a query." "We are executing this," Victor articulated. She examined him over her vessel. "I need to articulate something," he anticipated. "I absolve you," she articulated. "Not your mother, not what transpired, but you, for the years before, the absence, the hours, the manner you rendered me experience like I was anticipating something that continued not arriving." She positioned her vessel down. "I absolve you, not because it didn't wound, because I need to cease transporting it in the identical chamber as everything else we're constructing." Victor examined her for a protracted instant. He contemplated articulating he didn't merit it. He contemplated all the manners that was accurate. He determined that Cassandra Voss had expended sufficient years in a relationship with an individual who prioritized his own internal experience over the element she was authentically extending him, and that the appropriate response to absolution was not to dispute against it. "Gratitude," he articulated. "I will expend a substantial portion of the remainder of my existence endeavoring to be worthy of it." Cassandra's mouth executed the phenomenon, the nearly smile, the agonizing flash. Then it became an authentic smile, small and authentic and without performance. The initial he had observed on her countenance that was entirely unguarded. It endured approximately 4 seconds. Then she elevated her vessel and articulated, "The table assembly commences at 8. Jasper will be conscious at 7, and will desire to assist and will be meticulous about it, and you need to be braced for that procedure to consume until noon." "I'll be prepared at 7, Victor articulated. "Of course you will," she articulated, and there was something in it in the "of course." That was not sarcasm and was not quite tenderness yet, but was something between. Something that had been constructing for months through every Saturday and every Tuesday and every Thursday evening and every unwell night and every waterfall pond stillness, accumulating the manner trust accumulates, gradually, weight by weight, until one day you glance upward and it's substantial. He departed that evening. He still possessed the triplex, would maintain it for another month while the transition completed, and he navigated back to it through the January night and stood in its curated stillness and examined the metropolis and experienced the absence of syrup vessels and grey felines and the particular noise of individuals he cherished being animate adjacent. He did not slumber adequately. He was back at the new apartment at 7:02. The table consumed until 11:40. Jasper's evaluation of the directives was that they were insufficiently detailed on the leg-to-surface interface, which was precise, and his assistants assumed the form of clutching each component in precisely the appropriate position, while Victor applied the hardware, which rendered the procedure more protracted and more exacting and considerably more successful than it would have been alone. When the table was completed and upright and stable, Jasper ambulated around it once, examining each limb, then occupied what was apparently already his chair and positioned his palms flat on the surface. "Adequate," he articulated. Victor occupied the seat opposite him. "Adequate," he concurred. Eloin materialized from the corridor, having been notified by some internal sense that a new surface was now accessible, and ascended into her chair and positioned her elbows on the table with the confidence of an individual claiming territory. Oliver entered, evaluated the table, revised his provisional rating to substantiated satisfactory, and occupied his seat. Cassandra emerged from the kitchen with pancakes. It was Saturday, of course it was pancakes. She positioned the platter in the center of the table and examined the four of them occupying the space there. Her 3 children and this individual who had ambulated into a café 5 months prior and had been arriving ever since. And her countenance executed something private that she rotated back to the kitchen before it could be entirely witnessed. Victor perceived it regardless. He perceived it, and he archived it in the location where he maintained the elements that signified something, the location that had been vacant for 6 years, and was occupying presently, gradually and certainly, with ordinary instants that were worth more than anything he had ever purchased. Then arrived the morning, 3 weeks subsequently, when everything that had been constructing silently within the legal procedure fractured open into the open atmosphere. Cecilia Hale's attorney telephoned Patricia Okonkwo on a Tuesday morning with a settlement proposition. Victor was at the new apartment, in the midst of assisting Jasper with a puzzle that Jasper did not necessitate assistance with but had invited Victor's presence for, when his phone activated. "She's offering a complete acknowledgement," Patricia articulated. "Documented, notarized, delivered to the court. She acknowledges the document fabrication, the interference, all of it. She's not contesting the fraud claim. In exchange, she's requesting that the criminal referral to the district attorney be retracted." Victor was silent for an instant. "What does Cassandra desire?" he articulated. "I haven't telephoned her yet. I telephoned you initially." "Telephoned Cassandra initially," Victor articulated. "It's her determination as much as mine, Maury." Patricia hesitated. "That's affirmative. I'll telephone her presently." He positioned the phone down. Jasper, without glancing upward from the puzzle, articulated, "Was that significant?" "Affirmative," Victor articulated. "Is everything acceptable?" Victor examined his son, at the puzzle before him, a complex one, 500 components, a cartography of the world that Jasper had been assembling with the patient geographic precision of someone who found the configuration of elements deeply satisfying. "It's going to be," he articulated. Jasper positioned a component. Asia Minor clicked into location. He glanced upward. "Is it about the grandmother we haven't encountered?" Victor stilled. The children comprehended there was a grandmother. They comprehended in the partial, meticulous manner that children comprehend elements that adults have half communicated to them, sufficient to have formulated an image, not sufficient to have been burdened with the complete framework of it. "Affirmative," Victor articulated. "She's executing the appropriate element. It required her a duration, but she's executing it." Jasper contemplated this. "Is she going to encounter us?" "I don't comprehend yet. That's dependent on your mother." Jasper positioned another component, the subcontinent. "If she does," he articulated, "I'll reserve judgment." Victor regarded his son. "That's exceptionally equitable of you." "I comprehend," Jasper articulated, and maneuvered the puzzle component into position. Cassandra telephoned Victor 25 minutes subsequently. "I desire the acknowledgement," she articulated. "I desire it documented, court permanent. I desire there to be a record." Her voice was steady. "But I'm not pursuing the criminal referral." "Acceptable." "Not for her," Cassandra articulated, sharp and immediate. "For the children. I don't desire them to mature comprehending their grandmother is incarcerated. I don't desire that to be part of their narrative." She hesitated. She already appropriated sufficient from them. "I concur," Victor articulated. "Do you?" "Entirely." He signified it. He had been contemplating it for weeks, the boundary between justice and damage, between accountability and the particular cruelty of extending a conflict into the existences of children who had not solicited any of it. The acknowledgement is sufficient. The record is sufficient. She comprehends what she executed. We comprehend what she executed. That's sufficient. Cassandra was silent for an instant. "Acceptable," she articulated. "Communicate to Patricia." The acknowledgement was filed on a Friday in February, the identical week the triplets turned 5. Victor had inquired of Cassandra weeks in advance what the natal celebration tradition was. She had communicated to him, the copper kettle, because that was where it had commenced. That was the location. And she had transporting them every year on their natal celebration, even when it was challenging, even when ambulating past the memory of that initial encounter rendered her chest constricted. Because the location signified something, and the tradition signified something, and she was not the category of individual who permitted anguish to appropriate the elements she cherished. He had telephoned the café and arranged for the rear chamber, and the confection and the particular enchanted scones that Eloin had assured him were their natal celebration specialty scones, a variant with herbs that the kitchen fabricated only for reserved occasions. They arrived at 6, all 5 of them, and the proprietor, a small, genial woman designated Rosa, who had been operating the establishment for 23 years, encountered them at the entrance and shook Victor's hand with the firm grasp of someone who comprehended, without being communicated, that this was significant. The rear chamber had been embellished to Eloin's specifications, which Victor had obtained through a meticulous prior interview, and which had necessitated substantial negotiation with the celebration supply circumstance, resulting in a colour arrangement that could most charitably be designated as ambitious. Oliver endorsed the structural arrangement of the tables. Jasper proceeded directly to the seat with the optimal sightline to the entrance, which Victor had identified in advance and reserved. They requested, they consumed, the scones were as assured enchanted. Eloin articulated midway through the meal, "Dad, this is the optimal natal celebration." She articulated it the manner she articulated most elements, effortlessly, entirely, with the completeness of herself behind it, no reservation, no computation, simply the straightforward statement of a child who has evaluated the evidence and attained a conclusion. Victor articulated, "It's the optimal one I've attended." "You haven't attended the other ones," Oliver indicated. "That's why this one is the optimal," Victor articulated. "It's the sole one." Oliver contemplated this. "That's logical," he conceded. Jasper, examining his scone, articulated quietly sufficient that only Victor perceived it. "Joyful natal celebration to us." Victor examined him. "Joyful natal celebration, Jasper." Jasper glanced upward, and for the initial occasion since Victor had comprehended him, since the initial day at the café, since the bench by the waterfall pond, since the hospital, since all the mornings and evenings and Saturdays of the preceding 5 months, Jasper Hale smiled at his father with his complete countenance, not the measured, reserved approval of a meticulous child, not the evaluation of someone accumulating data, an authentic smile, the unguarded variety. The variety that signified the deliberation was concluded, and the verdict was rendered, and the verdict was affirmative. Victor was compelled to examine his plate for an instant. When he glanced upward, Cassandra was observing him. She had been observing him the manner she had observed him since the commencement, measuring, evaluating, examining the pattern against the assurance. But what was in her countenance presently was distinct from the commencement. The computation was still present, but beneath it, operating through it like a current, was something that had been constructing for 5 months of ordinary days. Something that had endured the hospital and the legal conflict, and the relocation containers and the table assembly and the 1140 discourses in the kitchen. It was not a straightforward element. It was the complex, selected, merited element that arrives after forfeiture and after absolution, and after the protracted patient labor of constructing trust from the wreckage of its absence. It was not the effortless element they had once possessed, that was vanished, and neither of them would pretend otherwise. It was superior to that, in the manner that elements reconstructed with complete comprehension of how they fracture are superior to elements that have never been examined. "Hey," Victor articulated quietly across the natal celebration table. "Hey," Cassandra articulated. And that was all, simply that, 2 individuals who had been through the most catastrophic version of their narrative and had arrived somehow at the commencement of an improved one. 2 individuals with 3 children between them and 6 years of absence behind them, and the remainder of their existences before them, measured not in assets or acquisitions or square footage of dominion, but in enchanted scones and waterfall ponds and table assemblies, and the particular music of 3 children who were finally, entirely habitation. Following dinner, ambulating back to the apartment, all 5 of them, the children between them, Eloin clutching one of Victor's palms and one of Cassandra's in the particular configuration she had recently asserted as her own, Oliver articulated. "Can we attend present every year?" "Affirmative," Cassandra articulated. "Even when we're aged?" "Even when you're aged," Victor articulated. "How aged is aged?" Eloin inquired. "Exceptionally aged," Oliver articulated with authority. As aged as Reginald, Eloin articulated. Reginald the waterfall is not that aged, Jasper articulated with the precision of someone who has been monitoring Reginald's agging process with scientific attention. How aged is Reginald? Eloin articulated. Unknown, Jasper articulated, but he's executing adequately. And Oliver articulated, I experience like we should obtain Reginald a natal celebration confection. And Eloin articulated, IGINALD's natal celebration, with the volume and conviction of someone who has just identified a moral obligation. And the natal celebration confection for Reginald became the primary subject of discourse for the remaining 5 blocks, with Victor contributing the logistical observation that Waterfall preferred bread to confection, and Cassandra contributing the regulatory notation that nourishing wildlife in the playground was technically discouraged, and Jasper contributing the intelligence that Reginald specifically would consume anything if you were patient about it. They attained the edifice. They ascended the stairs. The bedtime procedure was extended by natal celebration-related energy and the Reginald confection planning session and 2 supplementary narratives, and a protracted negotiation over whether natal celebrations entitled anyone to a subsequent bedtime, a position Oliver disputed with his customary rigor and Cassandra declined with her customary finality. When the corridor was finally silent, Victor stood in the kitchen with his outerwear still donned, and Cassandra stood opposite him, and they were alone in the apartment for the initial occasion all day. Remain, Cassandra articulated. Victor examined her. Not, she arrested, recommenced with the directness she perpetually located when she necessitated it. I'm not articulating everything is determined. I'm not articulating we bypass the portion where we determine it. I'm articulating it's late and the sofa is sufficiently protracted, and I'm fatigued of observing you don your outerwear and return to the triplex every evening when you're already habitation. The concluding designation landed in the kitchen between them. Victor removed his outerwear. He suspended it on the hook by the entrance, the hook that Eloin had labelled with a fragment of masking tape and an illustration of what was either a coat or a feline. The interpretation remained contested, and he rotated back to Cassandra. Acceptable, he articulated. Acceptable, she articulated. She extended him a covering from the corridor closet and proceeded to her chamber, and he proceeded to the sofa, and the apartment settled into its nighttime stillness with all 5 of its individuals within it. And Muffin emerged from wherever Muffin proceeded during the disorder of dinner and children and natal celebrations, and settled onto the sofa's terminus adjacent to Victor's feet, with the absolute authority of an animal who has determined this is where he belongs. Victor reclined in the darkness and attended to the apartment respire. He perceived Eloin rotate in her slumber, the manner she did dramatically like someone rendering a point. He perceived the particular stillness of Jasper's chamber, the profound, sound slumber of a child who has been unwell and is presently authentically, entirely recovered. He perceived, from down the corridor, the soft movement of Cassandra settling, and then the silence intensifying into the particular tranquility of a dwelling where everyone who should be present is present. He possessed 4.7 billion currency in a tower with his designation on it, and a dominion that operated on his determinations and his reputation, and the force of his singular focus. He reclined on a sofa with a feline on his feet, in an apartment that smelled of natal celebration dinner and children, and the particular domestic accumulation of a life entirely experienced. And he experienced, for the initial occasion in longer than he could distinctly recollect, that he was precisely where he was supposed to be. He had ambulated into a café on an ordinary Thursday in March seeking nothing particular, pursuing some nameless ache down 11 blocks of Manhattan pavement, and he had discovered everything, not the manner narratives state you discover elements, not abruptly, not in a solitary blinding instant of revelation. He had discovered it the manner authentic elements are discovered, the manner trust is constructed and absolution is merited and families are fabricated, one ordinary day at a time. One Saturday pancake at a time, one syrup vessel and fractured plaything and unwell night and waterfall pond morning at a time. He had learned that legacy is not an edifice with your designation on it. He had learned that power is not what you possess but what you select, and that the most significant selection an individual executes is not where to invest their currency, but where to invest their presence. He had learned that manifesting, Unglamorous, imperfect, consistent, without the performance of grand gestures, but with the daily actuality of simply being present, is the sole form of affection that children believe in, because it is the sole form they can observe. He had learned all of this from 3 5-year-olds, and the woman who had cultivated them alone for 4 years with nothing but her own extraordinary fortitude and the unshakable conviction that her children merited someone who remained. He was remaining, not because a court had mandated it, not because his attorney had structured it, not because the pattern of his obligation necessitated it. Because this sofa, this feline, this silent apartment, this woman down the corridor, these 3 individuals who had accepted the entirety of his defended and armored, and meticulously maintained heart and simply, casually, entirely dismantled it. This was the sole element in 38 years of his existence that had ever rendered him experience like he was existing rather than operating. In the morning, Eloin would be conscious at 6:30 and the pancake discourse would commence, and Jasper would necessitate the syrup vessel positioned precisely, and Oliver would possess a position on something that necessitated respectful engagement, and Muffin would execute at minimum one catastrophic determination involving the counter, and it would be boisterous and imperfect and entirely, irreversibly his. Victor Hale sealed his eyes. He was already habitation. If this narrative resonated with you, strike that like button and subscribe to late-night drama stories so you never miss an upload. I read every comment. Tell me below, what would you have done if you discovered you'd been separated from your children for years without your knowledge?